Good morning. The hearing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Tuesday, May 21st, 2019. The time is just after 9 o'clock a.m., and we are meeting in the hearing board room in Diamond Bar. We have one change to the schedule for today, and that is South Coast AQMD versus Sunshine Canyon Landfill, case number 3448-14. For a status report and modification hearing has been rescheduled to June 6th, 2019. And that leaves us with one matter on the calendar for today, and that is Phillips 66 Company, case number 4900-106 for a short variance. And who is representing Phillips 66 this morning?
Good morning, Madam Chair. It's Christopher Norton of Latham & Watkins representing Phillips 66 in this matter.
Good morning, Mr. Norton. And who is representing the executive officer?
Daphne Sue.
Good morning, Ms. Sue. At this time, I'd like to ask anyone who wishes to testify on either side or for the public to please rise at this time to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Okay, we have several documents, but I think first, Mr. Norton, let's ask for your opening, and then we can mark those documents once you're done.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the hearing board. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you. Phillips 66 Company appears today seeking a short variance to repair the Coke barn at the Carson plant located at 1520 East Sepulveda Boulevard in Carson, California. The subject equipment consists of the Coke barn at the Carson plant. The Coke barn was installed in 1970 and requires structural repairs. More specifically, 3 of the 24-inch I-beams in the Coke barn are corroded and need to be replaced. Petroleum coke is a necessary and useful byproduct of the refining process. Coke is about 90% carbon and is produced during the refining process continuously. The Coke barn is used to store and ship the coke from the facility. The refinery cannot operate as designed without the Coke barn in service. Here's the issue. District Rule 1158D2 requires the operator to maintain all coke piles in enclosed storage. Some of the panels on the Coke barn need to be removed to provide access to install the I-beams. When this happens, the Coke barn is no longer enclosed. A variance is required to open the Coke barn to make these necessary repairs. This issue is beyond Phillips's reasonable control. The Coke barn has been properly inspected and maintained. However, the I-beams are old, they're original to the building, 49 years old, and need to be replaced. Phillips 66 has attempted a repair. District Rule 1158K10 allows for a 14-day window for repairs subject to certain conditions set forth in the rule. Work was conducted at the barn from April 8th to April 21st under the exemption, but new issues were found. It was going to take longer to complete the work. At the end of the 14-day period, the panels were replaced. Phillips 66 is currently in compliance, but the repair work needs to be completed, and a variance is required to do that. There should be no excess emissions with mitigation. The coke is moist and will be stored in the barn with an opening. The excess emissions of PM10 are estimated at only 0.44 pounds per day, a little bit less than half a pound. In addition, we propose to wet some of the paved roads at the refinery to further reduce dust during the variance period. The revised calculated emissions from wetting of the paved roads is 0.98 pounds per day of PM10. With mitigation, then, Phillips 66 may actually be reducing the PM10 emissions by approximately half a pound a day if the variance is granted and the mitigation measure is accepted. These are small numbers. If the variance were denied, we would experience a significant economic loss estimated at more than $1 million per day. If the coke barn failed, then Phillips 66 would be out of compliance with Rule 1158. There would be a coke pile without an enclosure. Also, the coke room must be shut down, and with it most of the refinery. Repairing the coke barn now would eliminate this risk and is a prudent measure to do. To achieve final compliance in this matter, Phillips is asking for a 40-day variance starting on June 3rd, 2019 and ending on July 13th, 2019 to complete the Coke Barn repairs. We don't think that we're going to need the full 40 days, but we're asking for it as a contingency. I believe that the project schedule is something in the order of 24 days. Petitioner has worked with the district on revised proposed short variance conditions. We think we're in agreement, substantial agreement. There might be a couple of points that we're off, but we're pretty much aligned with the district on our proposed short variance conditions. Testifying in support of the petitioner are Scott Zerga and Khaled Ali. Both work at the refinery, Mr. Zerga in environmental and Mr. Ali in operations. Both are familiar with the petition and the subject equipment. We also have additional Phillips 66 personnel available to provide supporting testimony as needed during this hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. Before I turn to Ms. Sue, I just missed one date. You were requesting for the variance to begin June 3rd and end July. Which was that date? I missed that. 13th. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ms. Sue, you're opening.
Good morning. The district does not oppose this request for a variance. Phillips 66 has proposed mitigation measures, including the wetting of roads. The district would like to hear testimony as to how Phillips 66 proposes to estimate the number of trips on the Coke Barn roads. The district encourages the reductions of emissions during this variance period. We do not have any witnesses, but we do have an engineer here if the hearing board would like to hear testimony as to the calculations.
Thank you. At this time, before we begin with the first witness, let's mark some exhibits that we have. Let's begin with we have 5 exhibits that are attached to the petition for short variance. So to make it clear, let's start with those, and we'll mark those as they already are marked, which is excerpts of the permit is Exhibit 1. Exhibit 2 are some photographs. Exhibit 3 to the petition is a memorandum regarding the revised emission calculations for Coke Barn operations from Environmental Audit, Inc. It's a many-page document. Exhibit 4 are the PM10 mitigation calculations, and Exhibit 5 were proposed short variance conditions. And we received another packet this morning of additional exhibits. We received a number of additional photographs. The top one is dated May 16th, I think, 2019, and we will mark all of those as exhibit number 6. Mr. Norton, are these the same memoranda and calculations?
Thank you. It's very much the same. You'll notice that the date on this revised excess emissions calculations is a little bit different.
Okay.
So this is an update. The numbers are the same.
Okay.
The only thing that's been updated are a handful of references. This is in response to some district comments, but the conclusions, the numbers, they're all the same.
Okay, so we'll mark it separately since, as you've pointed out, it is a different date. So we will mark the updated revised memorandum, which is dated May 15th, 2019, as Exhibit 7. And also, the mitigation calculations are similarly revised?
So these are the calculations from the reductions in PM due to the wetting of the roads. And after consultation with the district, we have updated those. And if you'll note, we do have a handy map in the back, which we'll be using later on to show you which roads at the Carson plant that we would wet during the period of the variance.
Okay, thank you. So we will mark that updated PM10 mitigation calculation sheet, which is attached to a map, as Mr. Norton has explained, and both of those will be Exhibit 8 together. Okay. Do you want me to start from the beginning? Okay.
Take the bit large clip off.
Yes, if you take the clip off, you'll see that things are stapled together separately. So the top one you have, bundle, which is the pictures, the photos, those are Exhibit 6. And then the very fat memorandum, which comes next, is Exhibit 7, dated May 15th. And then the 2-page document which are calculations, and a map, that is Exhibit 8. And then finally, we have revised proposed short variance conditions, which is 2 pages, and we will mark that as Exhibit number 9. And with that, Mr. Norton, you may present your first witness.
Thank you very much. And as introduction, what we plan to do is introduce Scott Zerga to provide testimony. Then we're going to bring in Khalid Ali to provide testimony on the attempted repairs and the schedule. Then we're going to bring back Mr. Zerga to provide testimony on the regulatory portions of the variance, what we're asking for compliance with, et cetera. So with that, I'd like to bring Scott Zerga to testify.
And so, and since you're going, I'm sorry, since Mr. Norton is going to be bringing different witnesses on for different parts of testimony and then bringing back a witness, if we can all confine our questions to the testimony that is presented, and then we don't have to bounce back and forth. Thank you, Mr. Norton.
Thank you. Mr. Zerga, could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Sure, my name is Scott Zerga, and it's spelled Scotttzerga.
Are you testifying under oath today?
Yes, I am.
What's your current position at Phillips 66?
I'm an environmental engineer.
And in general, what are your duties in your current position, Mr. Zerga?
My general duties are regulatory compliance, focused on air programs.
How long have you been employed at Phillips 66?
I've been there 19 years.
Are you familiar with the petition for short variance that was filed in this matter?
Yes, I am familiar with the petition for the short variance in the matter.
Are you also familiar with the subject equipment?
Yes, I am familiar with the subject equipment as well.
Let's establish some background. What facility is the subject of today's variance hearing?
And so the subject facility is the Phillips 66 Carson plant, which is located at 1520 East Sepulveda Boulevard in Carson. The Carson plant is a major producer of fuels and other products.
And Mr. Zerga, what equipment at the facility is the subject of the variance petition?
The subject equipment consists of the coke barn at the Carson plant. After many years of service, the coke barn requires structural repairs.
How old is the coke barn at the Carson plant?
The coke barn was actually installed in 1970 and has been in service for 49 years.
I might just mention that the facility permit for the Carson plant identifies and further describes the subject equipment, and copies of the relevant sections of the facility permit are attached to the petition and have been marked as Exhibit number 1. Mr. Zerga, what is petroleum coke? What is it?
Petroleum coke is a byproduct of the refining process. Crude oil is processed into gasoline, jet, and diesel fuels, and leaving some residual crude. The crude resid is further refined by coking to produce fuels, and petroleum coke as the byproduct. The coker breaks down the crude resid to produce coke, which is about 90% carbon.
Is coke production essential to Carson plant operations?
Yes, coke is a necessary co-product of refinery operations. The coke is continuously produced throughout the refining process. The coke needs to be stored in an enclosed structure before being shipped to the port, which is then shipped out for sales.
Okay. Why does the coke need to be stored in an enclosure? What's the regulatory requirement?
So Rule 1158D2 requires the operator to maintain all coke piles in enclosed storage. The coke barn is used to store the coke produced by the coker unit.
Is the coke barn also used as the center for trucking of the coke from the Carson plant?
Yes, so the barn is equipped with covered conveyor belts, and we cannot effectively ship coke from the Carson plant without having the coke barn in service.
Is the coke barn essential for plant operations then?
Yes, the coke barn is used to receive and store coke produced by the coker unit. We cannot ship coke from the Carson plant without it.
At this time, I'd like to draw your attention, Mr. Zerga, to what's been marked as Exhibit number 6. These appear to be relatively recent photographs of the coke barn and associated equipment at the coke barn. Are these true and accurate photographs of the coke barn at the Carson plant?
Yes, in fact, I took them.
We have
Yeah.
personal certification here. I noticed that all the photographs have a date mark of May the 16th. Were they all taken on May the 16th?
Yes, they were.
And Mr. Zerga, could you please walk through the photographs and highlight relevant information for the members of the hearing board?
So the first picture there is a picture of the coke barn itself. This is from the east side looking to the, or west side looking to the east, and you can see the long horizontal structure of the barn with some temporary panels in place in the middle from the temporary repair that we attempted back in April.
And the coke barn's like 140 feet long, something like that?
Right.
It's a big one. And let's, anything more in this photograph?
No.
Let's go to the second photograph and exhibit number 6. What do we see here, Mr. Zerga?
Right, so this is a photograph of the barn and the handling equipment. So the barn itself is in the middle of the picture, the pyramidal shaped structure that you see with the pointed roof. So the coke comes in from the coker unit via a wet slurry process into the top of the barn. You can see the conveyor going in the middle and just under where the point of the barn is, distributed in the barn. And then the coke, when it's going to be shipped out, comes out from underneath the barn towards the left side of the picture into the material transfer tower, which is on the far left of the picture. Then it changes direction and goes through an enclosed conveyor up to the hopper, which is on the right side of the picture, that's where the trucks are loaded for shipment out to the port.
So this is, as far as your testimony goes, this is the coke handling system,
This shows you the coke handling system.
and also shows how the conveyor belts are enclosed.
Correct.
Okay. Anything more in this photograph, Mr.
No.
Zerga? Okay. Let's go on to the third photograph and exhibit number 6. Mr. Zerga, what do we see here?
So this is a more close view of the hopper structure where the coke trucks drive underneath that hopper and are loaded, and then for shipment out to the port. And you can see that it's a little wet under there from, that's part of the process we have, is it has to be wetted and to control dust on the trucks.
Anything more here, Mr. Zerga?
Nope.
Okay. Let's move on to the fourth and final photograph, which is in exhibit number 6. Mr. Zerga, what do we see here?
So this is a representative of the panels that you saw in the barn. This is a panel that's sitting on the ground there, so it shows you what they look like. It's a corrugated metal, and they're painted. So the one that's dark green that's on the right is ready to go, and the one that's on the left, which is a gray, it just needs to be painted.
Are these fairly big and heavy?
Yeah, and they're light, and they also can sail in the wind a little bit. So
Okay, okay.
handling them is not that easy.
And I will just mention that there are additional photographs in exhibit number 2. We're going to have Mr. Ali testify to that during his portion. Let's look at the incident together, if we could. Mr. Zerga? Why does Phillips 66 need a short variance in this matter?
So the coke barn requires repairs. Some of the structural elements of the barn must be replaced.
And please describe how Phillips 66 identified what repairs need to be performed.
So as a result of our routine daily inspections that we do, we identified some defects. So on around January 22nd, 2019, we actually employed a drone to do an inspection of the coke barn internal structure to further identify what repairs were needed. That inspection identified that 3 horizontal 24-inch I-beams had been partially severed and required replacement. After consulting with a structural engineer and repair contractor, a plan was devised to execute the repair during a 14-day window between April 8th and 21st, 2019.
Thank you for that, Mr. Zerga. I might mention that we are going to attempt to show you a portion of the inspection by drone in just a few moments. That's a technical challenge for us, but we'll try to do that. And I will also note that Mr. Ali will be providing testimony on the drone video and the inspection. Could this initial work be conducted under Rule 1158?
Yeah, so Rule 1158 was amended in 2008 to allow for routine maintenance work. If certain conditions can be met, District Rule 1158K10 allows for the storage of coke without an enclosure for facilities performing routine maintenance, repair, or of replacing component parts on or in enclosed storage structures such as roofing and siding material.
Mr. Zerga, did Phillips 66 comply with the conditions allowing for the 14-day window under Rule 1158K10?
Yes, we provided advance notice of the work to the district. We also complied with the other conditions that are in Rule 1158K10.
When was the initial repair work attempted, Mr. Zerga?
So maintenance work was conducted at the coke barn throughout the 14-day window, which began on April the 8th, 2019, and continued until April 21st. About midway through the repairs, which is about April 14th, 2019, structural engineers determined that additional shoring was required to support the structure to allow for demolition and replacement of the 24-inch I-beams to proceed.
And is additional time needed under variance to complete the repairs to the coke barn?
Yes, we need a short variance to complete the repair work.
And at this time, I had planned to call Mr. Ali. If there are no immediate questions for Mr. Zerga, he will be called back.
I think we should, just to make it easy, let's ask the questions on his direct testimony at this time. Ms. Sue, do you have any questions on the testimony thus far?
No, I have no questions.
Members of the board, yes, Ms. Byrd.
As far as coke barns go, what's the length of a normal life of an I-beam and that kind of thing? Do you have any idea?
I have to defer to Mr. Ali. He's more
Oh,
of an expert.
okay.
He's a mechanical
So,
engineer.
okay, so
that
if I have
stuff.
questions about the barn
Yeah.
that you, okay.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned it was deteriorated, and I thought you might be able to address, so you can
We
address that.
plan for Mr. Ali to address that. for
All of
you.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes, Mr. Zerga. On the Exhibit 6, what is the work that has been done to date from between April 8th to the 21st?
Right, so Mr. Ali will provide more testimony on that for you, but we attempted to do the structural repairs that were identified initially, and that's where we had to remove some of the panels under the exemption. And as we got into it, about April 14th or so, we found larger scope than we had identified originally, and so we couldn't get it done in the 14 days, so we regrouped and did what we could and put it back together and came to you for the variance.
So when you say the panel, what we're looking at in Exhibit 6, were those ones that were replaced, the darker green?
Right, so so that you can see the ones that look like plywood, which are plywood on there.
Right.
That was the temporary one we put back together. And then the larger one on the top, that's, part of it was painted, unfortunately it was painted the wrong color, and then just the whitish part is just an unpainted panel. So those are actually steel panels.
And I might mention, we will be reviewing the more detailed photographs in Exhibit Number 2, which show the work during the 14-day period in just a few moments with
okay,
Mr.
okay.
Ali.
Right.
And then on the, you mentioned the material loadout
Right.
for the truck. Do you have any, besides wetting, you mentioned they're wet, are there any bag outs or anything for controlling any of the dust?
So the trucks are top-loaded into, the trucks are I think that's 50% control, whatever it is in the rule. The trucks meet the rule standard. It's loaded from the top into the truck, and then the trucks drive through almost like a car wash, if you want to think of it that way. It's a spray that goes around the bottom, sides and top with a speed bump to make sure they go slow. And that's to fully wet and wash off any material that's remaining on the truck, and that's as required by the rule.
Okay. So there is no particular device control bag outs or anything?
No, there's no
for
bag
any of
outs.
this material? The structure, the barn is not vented in any portion to any bag outs or anything?
No, there's no bag house.
And it is wetted down, it's sprayed with water or some chemical
We have water spray available there, yes.
inside the barn
Right.
to wet it? Okay. All right, thank you.
I just had one question. I know there'll be another witness for most of this, but do you know how close the nearest receptor or resident or school is to the barn?
That's a good question. So I know that, I know Hudson Elementary School is about almost 2 miles away, mile and a half, to the east on Sepulveda Boulevard, and turns into Willow after the 103 freeway. I think that's the closest residential receptor that I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you. Any other questions on just that affirmative testimony, Senator?
Exhibit 3, environmental audit.
Senator, if we could, Mr. Norton had explained that, Mr. Zerga was only testifying right now as to what he just talked about. If we could just limit the questions to that, and another witness will certainly come on to explain those other questions you might have.
Talked about watering the trucks and keeping the surface wet, is that correct?
Absolutely.
your
and-
intent?
Yeah. In Part 2 of Scott Zerga's testimony, after we show you the video and go through some more pictures, we're going to bring Scott back, and he's going to talk about the mitigation measures, the wetting of the roads, and the other mitigation that we're going to do. We're going to do that in the second part of his testimony.
You're not prepared to do it at this time?
It
Why
it
you
would
want to
be,
skip over? Why you want to wait? Why you want to delay?
well, we do have prepared testimony on it that might answer your questions, And if that didn't answer your questions, we'll try to make sure that we answer it in our direct. And if we don't, we'll come back to it, and you can ask Scott in about 20 minutes, that same question.
Not 25.
You're the boss. If it's 25, it's 25.
I do think we appreciate structuring, because a lot of times we'll ask questions and then a witness will come on later, so I think that we'll wait. Okay, so any other, Mr. Balagopalan?
Just a follow-up for Mr. Zerga. On the facility permit that was included in attachment Exhibit 1.
Are you also wandering outside of his
No,
direct
but I think you
testimony?
mentioned
This
this.
is right.
But I just, I know you mentioned some of the conditions were attached to the petition, but I wonder, do you happen to know what D 323.1 is, condition number? Because that was not attached.
One moment, please.
Moment, please.
There's that one.
D 323.1.
Excuse me, a little confused. Want to work them through. So I think we're, there's 3 permit conditions that we're asking for relief for, and this will come up later in the testimony. One of them is S 13.1 in Section D. The other is E 136.1 in Section D as well. I believe that those are both in Exhibit number 1. And in addition, we're going to be requesting relief from administrative condition number 2 in Section E.
So what is the D 323.1? Do you know what that specifically addresses?
I do not. D 323.1, that would be another permit condition?
Right, it's referenced in the copy of the permit you gave for the bond
Oh, on the front end?
on the front end, yeah.
Okay. Not one that we're asking relief from? Okay. We could look at,
We'll look that up.
we have a copy of the facility permit, and we'll look that up for you at a break.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's, would you write that? D 323?
Okay, any other questions on that testimony? Okay, Mr. Norton, you wanted to introduce another witness.
Yes, please. At this time, I'd like to introduce Khalid Ali to testify. Mr. Ali, could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Good morning. My name is Khalid Ali, Khalid Ali.
Are you testifying under oath today?
Yes, I am.
What's your current position at Phillips 66?
I'm currently the maintenance superintendent at the Carson site.
And in general, what are your duties in your current position?
I oversee day-to-day maintenance and also oversee all non-routine maintenance projects.
How long have you been with Phillips 66?
13 years.
And are you familiar with the petition for short variance that was filed in this matter?
Yes, I am.
Are you also familiar with the subject equipment?
Yes.
Let's look at the incident just a little bit. Do you agree that the Coke barn requires repairs at this time?
Yes, so as Mr. Zerga just testified to, we've made good progress during the 14-day window, but there's still some additional repairs that we need to make. There's certain structural elements that still need to be replaced.
Could you please describe how Phillips 66 identified what repairs needed to be performed?
Yes, on January 22nd of this year, we conducted an inspection of the Coke barn structure by way of a drone device. From the inspection, we found that 3 horizontal 24-inch I-beams had partially severed and they needed to be replaced.
Thank you very much. At this time, we're going to try to show the drone video. It is one of a number of videos that were recorded inside the Coke barn. This is relatively new technology to use a drone to do an inspection. It's only been a few years that this technology has been available. I apologize in advance for the darkness of the video. It's really meant to be an industrial video, but since we had it available, we thought that you'd like to see what a drone inspection looks like, because we thought it was really quite interesting. With that,
All right, so this part of the video, the operator, as you can see there in the first part of it, the operator is getting ready to take the drone off and up into the A structure of the barn. This gives a good perspective shot of the barn structure as it's going up. The drone itself has a geodesic dome around it, protecting the propellers from becoming impacted by any components within the barn. As it's going up, you can clearly see the beams within the structure. It's going up to the upper structure here and scanning, doing a close scan of the beams. So it'll make contact here in a second.
Well, that's why it has
from
the
there.
dome, huh?
That's
Like it's
correct, yes.
Bounce right against it.
Right. And we started using this technology last year for the first time. It's relatively new technology. We actually used it to inspect the tank. And earlier this year, we were able to take advantage of the same technology to be able to do a close visual inspection of areas that have been previously really challenging to inspect.
So you see a little bit of corrosion there.
That's correct. And you can see some old scaffolding that's in the barn there.
It looks like there is some moisture in there. Is that because there's the ability to wet the coke inside the barn?
That's correct. And the coke is actually, as the coke fines are transferred into the barn, they come in with some moisture. And then there's some additional wetting that takes place within the barn.
How big is this coke barn?
It's 140 feet in length, and then it's 110 feet on the top side. And then the bottom portion of the barn is actually, it's not a flat bottom, it's a V shape at the bottom. So it's a pretty big structure.
How's the light getting in?
So there's a set of panels on the upper structure that aren't painted, and those are what we consider windows. It's still enclosed, but the transparency within those panels allows sunlight to come in. And then we also have lighting set up within the barn along the upper catwalks and lower catwalks within the barn for personnel to safely be able to access the barn. So here you can see a closer visual of one of the catwalks that's sitting on one of the beams there. So that beam overall looks like it's in pretty good condition there. So this will continue on for a few more minutes, and as we go, you get a better visual of the barn itself. There's a lower shuttle there, as you can see, that's out of service. It's been out of service for a number of years. And then the upper structure is the structure that we typically use to access the facility.
This video is about 7 minutes long, correct?
That's correct, yes.
You can see it actually bumping up against the structures again.
That's correct. Yeah, so the integrity of the ends of these beams looks, as you can see here, looks to be in pretty good shape. The area where we have compromised beams is towards the middle portion of the three beams that I mentioned earlier. So more of the same here, just coming up close to the beams and scanning along to give us a good visual indicator of how the structure is.
Is this the first time a drone inspection's been made of the coke barn?
Yeah, this is the first time we've been able to do this.
It's kind of cool.
Yes, yeah.
How does one get the job of drone operator?
Yeah, believe it or not, the operator that we used is a qualified drone operator. So I thought we could get like a 14-year-old kid or something to operate this, but couldn't do that.
He might do really well.
Yeah.
I see a little material down from the I-beam. What is that?
Yeah, so that's just old material in the barn from previous jobs. That looks like fire blanket in that location from years ago. As I said, it's really challenging to access a lot of these places, so oftentimes remnants are left.
And is that a 24-inch I-beam we're looking at right there?
Yes,
Okay, one of the three that needs to be replaced in the structure.
that's correct. So feel free to stop me at any time if.
I think we can probably wait till the video
Okay.
lands itself here in a minute.
Okay.
So how many times was this done inside the coke barn?
So this was done initially on January 22nd, and then we brought the drone back in on January 25th for a follow-up inspection of a few additional areas that we had questions on.
How many flights would you typically do during this inspection?
So for this inspection, I believe we conducted a total of 20, I believe it was about 20 flights.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a set of 24, there's 24 24-inch I-beams, and then in the upper section of the barn, there's another 24 16-inch I-beams.
Does this thing ever get stuck?
During the inspection, we did not have that issue. And I haven't heard of any issues with the drone getting stuck. There's a good view there of the siding from the other side. As Mr. Zerga mentioned, it's corrugated steel, and they come in panels that we screw onto the side of the barn.
So the green color's on the outside?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're not fully coated, just coated on the
Right,
outside.
and that's not it's not a requirement. It's just something we do internally for UV protection of the metal.
Do we need to continue the video?
No, we don't.
Okay,
Shall we end it?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
thank you, that was instructive.
Are there any questions about the video before we move on?
If you're going to have, did you have a clarifying question, or is Mr. Ali going to continue
He's going to
testifying?
continue testifying for a little while.
Just had,
Do you want to ask your question now, Ms. Sue?
just what date was this video?
It was shot on January 22nd.
And do you have any shots on this video that clearly show portions that show that it needs replacing? If you could point out, or if it's in a picture?
Yeah, we don't have any in that video, but we did take some still photographs of the damaged beams. If you'd like, we can share those with the group here.
We'll introduce that as another exhibit.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. You may continue, Mr. Ali.
Mr. Ali, what happened after Phillips 66 identified the need for repairs?
So after we conducted our inspection, we consulted with a structural engineer and a repair contractor, and we repaired a plan to repair the barn. The work was planned to be conducted during a 14-day window. There was some preliminary work that we could do prior to that 14 days, which we initiated. And then beginning on April 8th and ending on April 21st of this year, that was our 14-day window. During that time, we removed roof panels to allow for demolition work, and then also the installation of 3 new I-beams.
Did Phillips 66 prepare for the work to be conducted during the 14-day window?
Yes, we did. So as I mentioned, we consulted with our structural engineer and repair contractor, and then the coke barn repair work was identified in advance with a detailed analysis using the drone footage that we just viewed, some of the drone footage that we just viewed. We also hired an expert consultant to assist with planning and execution of the work.
At this time, I'd like to introduce another exhibit. Can we have this marked as exhibit number 10? It's a photograph of a corroded beam.
We'll just wait until it gets passed out to the board members. Okay, we will mark as Exhibit 10 this still photograph from the drone.
At this time, Mr. Ali, I'd like to draw to your attention to what's been marked as exhibit number 2. It's part of the petition. It's the photographs in exhibit 2 that we'd mentioned before. Mr. Ali, this appears to be additional photographs of the coke barn at the Carson plant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
These are true and accurate photographs of the coke barn?
Yes, they are.
And I guess let's start with the first photograph. Mr. Ali, could you please highlight for members of the board the relevant information?
Yes, so in this photo, we're in the process of installing one of the shoring beams. This is done laterally by way of the crane. So there's a 275-ton crane. This is on the east side of the barn looking west. And there's a jib on the end of the crane that's attached to this beam, which is basically being laterally moved into the barn. And then there's a couple of individuals. It's kind of hard to see in the picture, but there's a couple individuals in a man basket off of hooked onto another crane that are helping to guide the beam in, and then ultimately, once it's in place, securing it in position.
Anything else, Mr. Ali?
No.
Let's move on to the second photograph in exhibit number 2. What do we see here?
So in this photograph, this is actually at our repair contractor's yard. In preparation for this work, we did a series of test lifts considering how challenging the job was going to be. We did a series of test lifts in their yard just to assure ourselves that we'd be able to safely execute the work.
And this is a shoring beam?
That's correct.
And what's the size of this? It's not 24 inches, it's something a little bit less.
Right, so this one here is 60 feet long and it's 10 inches in width. And it's been engineered to stabilize and hold the load within the structure.
How would this compare with the 24-inch I-beams that are to be installed?
Yeah, so the 24-inch I-beams are approximately 55 feet in length. Because it's an A-frame structure, the higher we go on the structure, the shorter the length of the beam.
Anything more here, Mr. Ali?
Excuse me for one moment. I keep hearing some dinging, and just if everyone can please make sure that your phones are silent. Thank you.
Anything more in this exhibit, Mr. Ali?
No.
Let's move on to the third photograph, which is in exhibit number 2.
Yeah,
What do we see here?
So in this photo, it's similar to the first photo, just a different angle. Gives you a better perspective of the individuals in the man basket. So it's, like I mentioned, it's a challenging job, it's a high hazard job, and as a result, we also have to take weather conditions into consideration. For example, in this situation, anytime we're doing work out of a man basket, when wind conditions exceed 15 miles an hour, we have to stop all work and bring everybody down.
Is that one of the reasons you're asking for 40 days, even though you have a 24-day project schedule?
That's correct. During our initial 14-day repair window, 3 of those 14 days, we weren't able to work due to adverse wind conditions.
And that's fairly common at the coast, I imagine?
It has been, yes.
Anything more on this photograph, Mr. Ali?
No.
Let's move on to the next one. What do we see here?
So this photograph depicts the coke barn. This is on the west side looking east, and this is following that about midway through, which Mr. Zerga talked about within our 14-day window on April 14th. We identified some additional work that we weren't aware of until we started removing pieces of siding. So this required us to remove a greater structure or a greater portion of the siding. So you can see that here in the middle part of the picture. And then you also see a couple of individuals working out of a man basket there. At this portion in the project, they were working on demolishing, pulling out a conveyor belt within the structure in order for us to be able to continue demolition work and consequently installing I-beams, which we weren't able to get to.
And this only shows a portion of the coke barn, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
So one of the conditions we have is to limit the surface area to 2% as far as the panel removal. Are we going to be able to comply with that during the regular variance?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
While you have the photograph open, can you tell us, the photograph with this wider panel area, is that 2%? Can you just give us an idea of that versus the area that you have covered temporarily on the next page? What does 2% mean?
Yeah, so the amount of siding that we have removed in this picture is below 2%. We calculated it out to, I believe, about 1.8% of the total surface area of the barn. And then in the earlier photos that we presented of the barn enclosed, that equates to 0% of the barn being open and exposed to the atmosphere.
You may continue.
What do we see here in the next photograph, Mr. Ali?
So this is a photo shortly after the initial 14-day repair window of the barn enclosed, and as it currently sits today.
So this is with the panels put back on?
That's correct.
I imagine some of the dark panels had been removed in addition to the light green ones and the white panels?
That's correct. So as we saw in the earlier photo, some of the darker panels had been removed, and then we worked to reinstall those panels to make sure we're in compliance by April 21st.
It's a big barn.
It is.
And what do we see in the next photograph?
So this is just another photo. The earlier photo was on the west side. This is on the east side of the barn, depicting the siding being reinstalled and the condition of the barn as we sit here today.
Okay. Same thing with the next photograph?
That's correct. So this is another shot of the barn a little further out on the west side looking east.
Okay, thank you very much. Was Phillips 66 able to complete the repairs of the coke barn during the 14-day window?
No, we weren't. Although we made good progress during the 14 days, learned a lot, we weren't able to complete our work during that time.
I apologize for being redundant here, but was Phillips 66, why was Phillips 66 unable to complete the repairs?
Yeah, so about midway through the 14-day window on April 14th, Structural engineers determined that additional shoring was required to support the structure to allow the demolition and replacement of the 24-inch I-beams in order to be able to do that work safely.
And was this new information for Phillips 66?
Yes, it was. This was unexpected information that could only have been discovered with the panels removed from the barn. We realized that this additional work, the necessary shoring and subsequent repairs, could not be completed within the 14-day window.
And was the coke barn enclosed at the end of the 14-day window?
Yes, it was. As we just showed with the photos, we enclosed the barn and returned to compliance.
I neglected to ask you to testify as to exhibit number 10. I'll ask you to do that now. What do we see in exhibit number 10, Mr. Ali?
So in this photo, this is a still photograph taken from the drone inspection. So this is a portion of the 24-inch I-beam directly below a lower catwalk. So you can see the grading up above, which is our lower catwalk, which we've condemned since discovering this issue with the beam. This is a 24-inch horizontal I-beam that's partially severed, so you can see where it's drooped down in the middle of the photo. It's drooped down. The webbing within the beam has corroded, and the lower portion of the beam is attached, but the upper portion of the beam is not attached, which is the issue that we're working to resolve.
Is this one of the original beams?
Yes, it is. So this was original construction in August of 1970.
So it was in service for how many years?
Approximately 49 years.
Is that acceptable length of service for a coke barn?
So I can't answer that specifically, as the life of beams varies depending on the conditions that they're, or the atmosphere environment that they're exposed to. But speaking with structural engineers, their estimation is approximately 50 years is a adequate serviceable life for a structure.
And this is in a very corrosive environment, correct, Mr. Ali?
Yeah, so where these beams are located, these three specific beams that we're working to repair or replace are directly around where the coke fines fall into the barn, which is it's a wet environment, so it's more corrosive compared to the rest of the coke barn structure.
Any other questions, any other testimony on this?
No.
Okay, we'll move on. So, Mr. Ali, what additional work needs to be performed during this variance period?
Yeah, so initially, we'll have to go back and remove the roof panels from the barn in order to be able to safely access the interior. After that's done, we need to complete the demolition work of the severed beams, along with some beams that sit on top of those severed beams. Once that's completed, then we're going to go ahead and install these new 24-inch I-beams, and we're going to install them in a similar fashion to what we just showed in the pictures with the temporary shoring beams. Once those three beams are in place, then we're going to proceed with reinstallation of the roof panels.
How much time does Phillips 66 need to complete the repair work of the coke barn?
Yeah, so we're estimating, working with our repair contractor, we're estimating approximately 24 days in order to complete that work. However, we feel that it's prudent to build some additional time for unexpected occurrences, including adverse weather, which we talked about earlier, and other uncontrollable factors. And for that reason, we're requesting a total of 40 days for the variance.
Will Phillips 66 make every effort to complete the work sooner than the 40 days?
Yes, we have every interest in getting the work done as quickly as possible while still being safe and responsible.
Do you think that Carson will require the full 40 days then?
No, if the weather, is on our side, we should be able to complete the work sooner based on our estimates.
I have no more questions for this witness. We do plan to bring Scott Zerga back to testify more to the items in the petition, but this would be the time to ask Mr. Ali about the 14-day repair period, or the corrosion on the beams, or the inspections, or all the operations-related issues. Thank you.
And is it Mr. Ali or Mr. Zerga who we could ask questions with regard to the proposed short variance conditions and compliance?
That would be Mr. Zerga.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sue, any questions on the testimony so far, Mr. Ali?
No questions.
Board members? Ms. Bird?
Under normal circumstances, your petition says that there's a daily inspection. What does the daily inspection entail that would tell you anything about these beams?
Yeah, so the daily inspection that we refer to is done by the operators that operate the barn. So they'll, on a daily basis, they'll walk the upper catwalks, which we showed some of that in the footage. They'll inspect all of the conveyors. They'll inspect the shakers and other equipment that we have within the barn. But as far as close visual inspection of the beams below, which we showed with the drone footage, it's really difficult for them to be able to conduct a close visual inspection of those beams on a daily basis, which is, the fact that we have this new technology and being able to inspect the structure with a drone is going to be really beneficial and advantageous for us going forward.
So how would you have known that you had major issues like this without the drone inspection?
So there was some observation that there might have been something going on in the structure from ground level, and then at that point we enlisted the services of this drone in order to be able to confirm that, and that's what we did on January 22nd.
And in normal, I guess under normal circumstances, you wouldn't have had a drone. You said it's just been available for a few years. How would you have known? Could you have gotten to this point?
Yeah, so the only way would have been to build scaffold or rappel off of upper structures, or wait until the coke barn is completely out of service during major turnarounds in order to be able to conduct the visual inspection that we were able to do with the drone. So.
And is that something that is done during major turnarounds?
Yes, it is.
So a total inspection of the structure?
Correct.
And so you would know, when was the last major turnaround?
That was in 2016. So this occurred between that time and when we did the inspection earlier this year.
Okay. Let's see, just make sure I don't have any. I can come back because I need to find it.
I just have one follow-up on that. When is the next major turnaround, and why could this not wait till the next major turnaround?
Yeah, so the next planned major turnaround is in 2025. And even with that also presents challenges in being able to evacuate all of the coke fines from the barn.
Thank you.
Sure.
Could you emphasize that point? Because it's more than just the major turnaround, correct?
Right, yeah, so in order for us to be in compliance, it's not just having the barn down, but the coke fines, the coke pile also has to be completely evacuated down to, I believe it's a 3-inch pile in order for us to be in compliance, which our approximation is it would take approximately 6 weeks just to get to that point. And then after that, we'd be able to proceed with the work, and so a lot would have to go into that.
And the reason I mention that is just to emphasize, this is a different issue. They can't come into compliance just by shutting down the plant.
Understood.
They'd have to actually shovel out the coke from the coke barn as well.
Understood. Just trying to understand when that next time would be.
Sure.
Mr. Balagopalan, you had questions as well.
Actually, a follow-up with Ms. Pruzak. So is this a safety issue for personnel too, on the catwalk, because the beams are?
Yes, it is. So we've installed the shoring beams, which we mentioned earlier, to stabilize the structure. But those shoring beams obviously cannot be in there until 2025. We need to act on the issue that we have currently with the severed beams.
So you identified while you were replacing the panels that additional shoring beams are required?
That's correct, yeah. So initially, we thought we only needed 5, and we could go ahead and proceed with the demolition work. But as we were removing siding, we identified that there was more structural issues within the column and the beams that span one bay to the next, which required us to install additional shoring in the barn.
So how many additional shoring beams do you have to put in?
We installed 2 additional beams, and then they also required us to remove more of the siding in order for the structure to be able to settle into position.
So are all the shoring beams in place now that you need?
All the shoring beams are in place, but those are only considered temporary beams, and that doesn't forego us from needing to replace the severed beams.
So the sequence now, you have the shoring beam in place, you have enclosed temporarily all the panels that you have removed.
That's
right?
correct.
So to remove the I-beams, you do it do you have to remove the panels again?
Yes, the only way to be able to access the structure that we spent demolishing the severed beams along with some beams that sit on those beams, and then once all of that structure has been demolished, then we'll be able to go in and install the new beams.
So you would go in sequence, you will open the panels where the first I-beam is, do that, and then move forward? Is that how, or
It
backwards?
would, the easiest way we found during the 14-day window to approach it in the safest way is to open all bays up first, and then once all the bays are completely open, then go in and start doing the demolition work, so that the man baskets, the people working in man baskets have safe access both into the barn and out of the barn.
And that, all that open will still be under the 2%?
That's correct, yes.
And how did you, because you have the total square footage and
That's correct.
each panel, you have a certain amount, and
Right,
you can
yeah,
tell-
so we calculated the total surface area of the entire barn, and then from that, we were able to determine how much we could remove and still be under that 2% requirement.
So the 2% is sufficient for the work to be done?
Yes, it is, yes.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Senator?
This coke operation, you produce coke and you store coke in the barn
That's correct.
at a specific location or just at any place?
So we store the coke in the coke barn, which is the barn that we showed in the photos. That's our storage facility for coke fines.
And what happens to the other part of the coke?
So that all the coke that we produce is transferred into the barn. The coke fines that we produce are transferred into the barn, and then after that, as we showed in the testimony earlier with Mr. Zerga, the coke fines are then transferred into this loadout hopper, and then trucks come in and pick up the coke fines, and then they're trucked off for third-party sales.
How many beams are in this barn?
There's a total of 48 beams, 20 horizontal beams. So there's 24-inch horizontal beams that go east-west along, the north-south span of the barn, and then above the 24-inch horizontal beams, there's 24 16-inch I-beams.
And they're good for about 49 years?
So the ones that we're working on replacing look like they've talked to us and they've told us that their service life is about 49, 50 years based on the damage that we've observed.
What about the service lives of the ones that you're not repairing?
So there's some that we've repaired or replaced in earlier years, and there's others that are still in good condition even after 50 years. And that's just, I think, a result of the location within the barn, as I mentioned earlier. Where these beams are located is a more corrosive environment compared to the rest of the barn.
Are the beams adversely affected by the coke? Something?
Yeah, so it's a combination of the coke and the moisture. So the coke has some sulfur in it, and when that combines with the water that comes in with the coke fines, that produces sulfuric acid, and sulfuric acid with steel over time ends up corroding the beams.
Is that a working area for personnel?
They don't work in that specific location. They work above that location.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have one more question about, you had that photograph where it was open, and
Right.
you testified it was about 1.8%. How long was that area open?
So that was open for approximately 7 or 8 days, because it took us about 3 days to remove the siding and then another 3 days to reinstall the siding.
And during that time, were there any visible emissions that
No.
were observed?
There were not.
Okay. Ms. Byrd, you had a question?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this question is for you, but I'll put it out there, and if it's for the next person, we'll take it then. In the petition on page number 4, number 14, in that last paragraph, there's some mention of the removing all the coke without creating much larger emissions from the movement and cleanup compared to the very small amount of emissions, if any, that will occur. I'd just like to have numbers, if there are some numbers that can tell me what it would have been at, one way versus the other. So I'm not sure if that's you, and if it is, maybe you can address it, or if not, we'll wait for whoever can address it.
Yeah, on that one, I'll defer to Mr. Zerga
Okay.
and others, yes.
I don't,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
I don't know that we've done a calculation, but we can provide
Approximate.
we can provide testimony
Okay.
on that, and it would create quite a mess.
Okay, okay.
Mr. Balagopalan, you had a follow-up question?
So the plywood that we are seeing, that's a temporary, and then you'll be replacing that with the Is that where, why is that plywood right now? Is that where you plan to open up for the, removing the I-beams?
Yeah, so the reason why it's plywood is that was a quick way of reinstalling, and then also knowing that we're gonna, at some point down the road, get back into the barn, to be able to remove, and then also allows us to limit the amount of, how big of an opening we have to create, because if we were to remove a full panel, that'd be a much larger opening on the side of the barn as opposed to a cutout for, where you see the plywood reattached.
Is there some kind of temporary sheeting that can be done at the end of the workday, you know, when when the panels are open? Is there something like a tarp or something crude like that that can still cover the openings?
Yeah, we looked into that, and the size of the tarp that would be required, it would present a lot of challenges in order to be able to safely install that. And then as we've seen with the wind, high wind conditions, we don't know if we'd be able to secure that. I don't think we could secure that safely, because if that starts to fly around, especially with people working in man baskets, it would pose a safety hazard. And then just the feasibility of acquiring a tarp that size and just logistically being able to install a tarp that size poses a lot of challenges. And it also would take away from being able to just execute the work. We'd probably have to work longer in order to be able to install that tarp and then remove that tarp if it was even feasible.
Would that be same of the plywood if you were to cover it with plywood at the end of the day and then?
So the size of the opening size that would be required in order to safely execute the job, we wouldn't be able to cover that with plywood at the end of each shift. It would require us to install basically in the upper section that we saw in the photos, it would require full sheets of siding to be installed and then removed again, which just installing the siding and removing it, that's approximately a 6-day activity. So if we were doing that at the end of each job, it just wouldn't be practical.
And then I'm assuming the shorings are temporary. You will remove once the beams are tested and found to be, the I-beams are.
That's correct, yeah, so it's considered temporary. We may leave that there after we install the 24-inch I-beams just to provide additional rigidity and stability to the barn. The only thing we might do differently is how we attach those shoring beams to the columns.
Are there going to be any welding metal?
Correct, yeah. So we're going to be welding the new beams when they go in, and then we may go back on these shoring beams that we've installed and also weld the ends of them too, just to provide additional stability within the barn.
Is it considered an explosive dust inside the barn?
Explosive?
Dust with the coke?
Sorry, did you say, is it explosive?
Yeah.
I don't believe it is. No, it's not.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator.
What is the material of the beams?
They're carbon steel beams.
Are they insulated in any way to protect it from the sulfuric acid, from the acid?
Yeah, so the beams that we're pulling out aren't currently insulated, but the beams that we're going back in when we put the new beams in are going to have a protective coating on them to be able to further extend their life beyond the 50 years that we saw with the beams that we have in there currently.
The acid etched away.
It just corroded the beams over time.
Okay.
Ms. Berg.
One very small question. And the fact that you are beginning this on June 3rd, is that based on the engineering consideration, or is that based in any way on the weather, and how did you come up with that?
Yeah, so the first critical step was this hearing, so we knew that we were going to have to come here today, and before we could do anything, we would need a variance, so that was part of the consideration. And then the second consideration is we wanted to, once we got, whether it was a yes or a no, we need enough time in order to be able to deploy and mobilize cranes, because in order to execute this work, we need to utilize 5 cranes. And so we need to be able to reach out to our repair contractor, make sure they have adequate time to be able to mobilize to the facility, and then we also need to make sure we have all of our materials in place in order to be ready for that June 3rd date.
Okay, and I guess my concern basically was you experienced a period in your 14 days of 3 days of not being able to operate, and I know you've built in some days, but I guess trying to see if you've built in enough days or if.
Yeah, hopefully being that it's California, I know there's June gloom and other things, but hopefully June will be on our side and And we believe that with the, the 24-day schedule that we built and then the additional 16 days of contingency, that should be sufficient in order for us to be able to complete all of the work that we need to complete.
Okay.
Mr. Balagopalan?
How many piles do you have? Are there 4 segregated piles in the?
So it's really one big pile, and then on top of that one big pile, there's 2 smaller piles, which we call our coke fines, and then there's another pile that's like the lump coke. So there's basically just a big, really big, long pile, and then there's 2 small piles that sit on top of that
What's
pile.
the highest point of the pile?
So I believe, I'd have to go back and look at the drawing, but I believe it's about 120 feet just to get to the kind of flush with the road. And then on top of that, I'd be guessing if I told you how many additional feet above that the pile would sit. But typically, it's close to flush, and then you have the pile on top of that. But I wouldn't be able to give you specifics on how high it typically
And the
is.
water sprays, they're all along the length of the barn?
Yeah, so the water spray, it comes in wet, and then we typically focus our water spray in the location where the coke fines are dropping, which is close to the middle of the barn. And that's where these beams are located.
And are the other the material that is there, what's the residency time of a coke material that you bring in? How long do they?
Yeah, how long does the coke pile sit
Before it gets,
stagnant before
yeah,
it moves?
moves out.
When we're working kind of under normal operation, I believe it's about two weeks. We'll build, and then we go through what we call a loadout campaign, and that campaign varies depending on sales. But normal is about two and a half weeks, and then it's turned over.
So those are wetted separately? Are those piles wetted separately?
They're all part of within the barn. That's all part of the normal operation. And those piles sit close to the center of the barn where the fines drop.
Okay, so they get wet
That's
by,
correct.
while you're wetting where they're dropping, they also maintain in a moist condition?
That's correct, yes.
So when they're shipped out too, what % moisture would you say they have in them?
So I can't give you a specific number. I know when they come into the barn, they vary between, I believe, 13 and 15%. And then going out, I'm not sure. I don't have the specifics on what the moisture content is on the way out onto the trucks and out of the facility.
I might mention that there's a rule requirement that it needs to be 8.3% moisture, I believe.
Yeah, I believe we took some samples, but I'm not privy to the exact moisture content.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator has another question. Mr.
Right, you
Early.
have a daily inspection. What are you looking at?
Yeah, so the operators are primarily looking, we have a combination of operators and maintenance mechanics, and they're primarily looking at, we have a lot of equipment, conveyor belts and things like that, so they're looking at the belts, inspecting the belts, making sure there aren't any frays. They're inspecting the rollers that the belts roll on to make sure that there aren't any issues there. They're inspecting the gearboxes and mechanical equipment that drives those belts, making sure that they're oiled, that there aren't any issues with that. They're also doing inspections around our machines to make sure that all of our machine guarding and safeguarding is in place. And then they also do an inspection of like the grading that they walk on, the catwalks, to make sure there aren't any integrity issues within the barn. They also do, as they're walking through, look at the siding, make sure that the siding is in place. And then they do an observation of the coke pile and make sure that we don't have any issues within the coke pile.
How often they change the rollers or the padding or whatever, and things that you explained?
Yeah.
Based on the etching of the acid in that environment.
Yeah, so I can't give you a specific on how often. I know that in my time, we've typically done a belt repair or replacement about once a year. That's because it's a continuous process. They're always running. And then we also have a preventative maintenance program in place where if we identify a roller that may need to be replaced, we'll do that on a proactive basis. But I can't give you specifics on how often that
Preventative
occurs.
maintenance, that's what you mean, you're making these changes before it happens?
That's correct.
Do you have
exactly.
a time frame on that?
That's done monthly. The
You make the
PM,
changes monthly?
the PMs are conducted monthly in addition to the operator rounds. And then based on those PMs, we do repairs as required.
What's a PM?
Preventative maintenance.
Inspection.
Any other questions for Mr. Ali? Mr.
Sally,
Balagopalan?
Yes, sir.
In the Exhibit 8 at the revised calculation on watering down the paved roads,
Yes, we are going to have Mr.
We have not had any testimony on that yet.
Oh,
We could
okay.
wait for the,
Somebody else
for the
is going to-
affirmative testimony on that,
Okay.
and then we
All
can
right,
ask
then I'll-
questions.
It's going to be interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Ali on his testimony? Okay, seeing none, this would be a good time for a short break. And let's take a break until 25 after 10. And we'll come back, I think, with Mr. Zerga again. Is that correct?
Correct, thank you.
Okay, we are off the record. We are back on the record, and I believe we are back with Mr. Zerga.
Thank you. I did have a procedural question. For the showing of the drone video, we do have a flash drive that we could enter into the record or not. Really, okay?
I don't know that unless you want it for evidence, we can just we can just note for the record that it was shown. It was shown to everyone who might have been viewing the webcast as well, and so it's just demonstrative, I would imagine.
Thank you.
And we did mark the one very relevant portion of that as exhibit number 10.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to recall Scott Zerga to testify. Mr. Zerga, you're still under oath, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Let's talk about the variance request. And I apologize for some of the redundancy here, but what is Phillips 66 requesting in this proceeding?
All right, so we're requesting a 40-day variance starting on June 3rd, 2019, ending on July 13th, 2019, to complete the Coke Barn repairs and achieve final compliance in this matter. I just, real quick, wanted to apologize for that. It was my cell phone that went off. We were trying to get that condition answered for you, so I turned it off now, so it's on silent.
That wasn't a question.
I know. Just wanted to apologize for that.
Mr. Zerga, is the subject equipment in compliance with applicable district rules and conditions?
Yes, we are currently in compliance with the Coke Barn operations.
Would the proposed work violate any district rules or permit conditions?
Yes, the repair work requires removal of roof panels. Once removed, we would be in violation of District Rule 1158D2, which requires that the operator shall maintain all piles in enclosed storage.
Would the proposed work violate any other district rules or permit conditions?
Yes, so District Rules 203B, 2004F1, and 3002C1 require that permitted equipment be operated in compliance with all facility permit conditions. The facility permit includes conditions impacting the operation of equipment.
Does Phillips need relief from condition number S13.1 in this matter? A little different.
Yes.
And why is that?
Condition S13.1 requires that the Carson plant comply with Rule 1158.
Okay. Does Phillips need relief from condition number E136.1 in section D of the facility permit in this matter?
Yes, condition E136.1 requires that coke be stored in an enclosure.
And you need relief from that
Yes,
because it wouldn't be enclosed after you remove a panel.
correct.
Does Phillips 66 need relief from permit condition D323.1 in section D, which is applicable to the Coke Barn?
No, we do not.
And why is that, Mr. Zerga?
Condition D323.1 requires a visual observation of visible emissions at the facility once a year to see if there's any emissions coming from the Coke Barn or the appurtenances. And we've already actually completed that for 2019 on May 9th. So we feel we're in compliance with that condition.
So since you're in compliance with it, you don't need relief?
Correct.
Okay. Does the Carson plant need relief from administrative condition number 2?
Yes, administrative condition number 2 states that the operator shall maintain all equipment in such a manner that ensures proper operation of the equipment. We cannot comply with administration condition number 2 when the Coke Barn is open.
So if you're going for a variance, you pretty much need relief from condition number 2.
Correct.
Okay. Let's move to the beyond reasonable control element.
Okay.
Is it beyond Phillips's reasonable control to comply in this matter, Mr. Zerga?
Yes, the need for a variance is beyond the reasonable control of the Carson plant.
And could you please explain?
As you've heard and seen on the drone video, we've inspected the Coke Barn with drones and identified 3 horizontal beams that required replacement. An attempt to repair the barn was made on April the 8th, started on April the 8th. The work included shoring to support the structure while the beams were replaced. About April 14th, 2019, we found additional work was needed. This was unexpected information that could only be discovered with the panels removed from the barn. Despite our attempt to repair the Coke Barn without a variance, we will need additional time to complete the work.
And would the variance allow for the safe completion of the repairs of the Coke Barn?
Yes, it would. We need the variance to finish the repairs.
Has Phillips 66 maintained the subject equipment in accordance with good operating practices?
Yes, operators perform daily rounds, checking the Coke storage equipment, and perform preventative maintenance.
I think we heard some
And we
other,
already heard
some
Mr.
testimony
Ali.
from Ali talk about that.
Right.
And would Phillips 66 be required to shut down the coker if a variance was not granted?
Yes, the only way to perform the work in compliance with all district rules would be to first shut down the coker and other related units, then remove all the coke from the coke barn, and only then could we open the roof panel and complete the repairs. And then we'd have to, of course, replace the panels and then restart the coker and other units.
We've heard testimony there is quite a bit of coke in the coke barn, correct?
Correct.
And do you have you prepared an estimate of what the PM10 would be for removal of the coke at this time? And the answer can be no.
No, we've not. When we remove the coke, it would be in compliance with 1158 as well, using the facilities we already have, so shouldn't be any excess there.
We have heard testimony that there is a lot of coke. We've actually seen that on the video and in the photographs. Would you say as an estimate that it would be in excess of 100 pounds of additional emissions of PM from removal of the coke from the coke barn, just as an engineering judgment?
It's difficult to say because we're going to remove the coke, ratably. We have to wait for the ship to come in at times. There's limited storage at the port, so to remove coke from the barn and ship it out, there has to be a ship there waiting for us. So that's why the time it takes a long time to totally empty the barn. That's why Mr. Ali talked about doing it in 6 weeks, more or less, and that's if we can get ships in and utilize the limited storage we have at the port as well. But we will ship it in compliance with 1158. So, despite being in compliance with the rule, there will be PM, that's unavoidable because of because of shipping it out, so.
Would it be in excess of the half a pounds we're looking at in this
It
matter?
would be in excess of a half a pound per day that
Okay.
we're talking about here.
Would it be in excess of 10 pounds?
Could be.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. So you have testified that in order to actually perform this work in compliance, you'd have to shut down the coker and you'd have to remove the coke from the coke barn?
Correct.
Would this be an acceptable alternative when compared to the variance?
No, the coker would need to be shut down to stop the generation of coke. This would result in shutdown of other units and create the potential for flaring as a result of that shutdown. Furthermore, we could not remove all the coke in the barn without creating larger emissions from the coke movement and cleanup here. So after consideration, we concluded that the removal of the coke was not practicable, and a variance was needed to complete the barn repairs.
Regarding curtailment, Mr. Zerga, have you considered curtailing operations of the Carson plant to achieve compliance?
Yes, we have considered curtailment of operations in lieu of a variance. However, there is no option that would avoid the need for the variance. If the variance were denied, the coke barn may experience a sudden failure of the structural supports. If this happened, there could be no place for the coke generated at the Carson plant to be stored and shipped in compliance with district rules. Therefore, there's no reasonable alternative that would avoid the need for a variance.
Thank you for that. Let's move to excess emissions. Do you anticipate any net excess emissions of PM10 during the variance period?
No, with the consideration of mitigation measures that we propose, there should be no excess emissions.
What is Phillips's estimate of excess emissions from the coke barn during the variance period?
So our initial estimate of excess emissions as a result of the work to be performed during the variance period of PM10 was 0.44 pounds per day.
And I might just mention that that is reflected in what's been marked exhibit number 7. Has Phillips 66 explored ways to reduce excess emissions in other areas of the refinery?
Yes, we evaluated ways we could reduce the PM10 emissions at the refinery. By keeping the coke at 12% moisture, that by itself reduces PM10 emissions from the coke barn. These reductions are reflected in our excess emission calculations. In addition, we propose to wet paved roads at the refinery 3 times per day to reduce PM10 during the variance period. The calculated reductions of PM10 from wetting of the paved roads equals about 0.98 pounds per day of PM10.
So would there be a net reduction in PM10 emissions from this proposed work at the refinery during the variance period?
Yes, with mitigation, Phillips 66 will be reducing the total PM10 emissions from the Carson plant by approximately 0.54 pounds per day during the variance period.
Mr. Zerga, I note that you had prepared a revised estimate of reduced emissions from mitigation. I believe those have been marked as exhibit number 8 in this proceeding.
Right.
Mr. Zerga, could you please briefly walk us through the calculations and, more importantly, provide testimony on the map and what would actually be proposed during the variance period?
Right, so these calculations are based on EPA's AP 42, Section 13, which is, and then Part 2, which is about paved roads. And so you're basically calculating the dry roads and then the effect of the wetting on the roads. And then the key variable there is the amount of vehicle miles traveled per day, which is VMT. And we base that in this calculation on and I'll show you the map in a second, of 12 sulfur trucks is a typical amount of trucks driving into the sulfur loading facility and back. And an estimate of 15 vehicle round trips from the main gate area to the Coke Barn work site and back per day. And that gives you the net reduction of 0.98. And if I draw your attention to the map on the second page, this is a map of the Carson plant. It's a Google Earth style image there. And so the red lines show you where we propose the routes of the proposed watering. The line that's starting, that's the north-south line.
The vertical line?
The vertical line, north-south, is the sulfur truck loading route. So the trucks drive into the main gate and they get weighed, and then they drive down to the south, to the bottom there where the sulfur loading rack is, and they load up and they turn around and they come back. And that's more or less about 12 trucks per day, and we will track those numbers of trucks. So the other wetting road will be the road that runs to left and right or east-west. It comes from the main gate area, and that's driving into the main gate and then driving over to the Coke Barn work site and back.
Is it fair to say that about half of your estimated reductions in PM10 emissions from the wetting of roads comes from the sulfur trucks?
Correct.
And the other half would come from the worker trips?
That's right.
And they equal roughly a pound a day?
Right.
Okay. Well, does Phillips 66 expect there to be any significant visible emissions from the openings in the Coke Barn during the variance period?
No, we will use our best efforts to ensure there are no visible emissions from the Coke Barn during the variance period.
And were there any visible emissions during the 14-day repair period?
No, there were not.
I'd like to draw your attention to what's been marked as Petitioner's Exhibit Number 9. These appear to be the revised proposed short variance conditions in this matter. Is that correct?
Yes.
Has the Phillips 66 worked with the district on the development of the proposed short variance conditions?
Yes, we did.
Thank you. Would the repair work to the Coke Barn avoid the potential for flaring at the refinery?
Yes, if the variance were denied, we may be forced to shut down and restart refinery units, which creates potential for flaring.
Would Phillips 66 monitor for emissions during the variance period?
Yes, we will monitor emissions during the variance period.
Will Phillips 66 provide copies of its monitoring records to the district upon request?
Oh, yes, we will make any emissions records available to the district.
And I think you've answered this, but has Phillips 66 worked with the district on the proposed short variance conditions?
Yes, we have coordinated with the district on the development of the conditions.
How does the Carson plant plan to achieve compliance in this matter?
To achieve final compliance in this matter, Phillips 66 will complete the repairs to the barn, including replacement of the roof panels, as expeditiously as possible.
When does the Carson plant plan to do this work?
So we're requesting that the short variance period start on June 3rd, 2019, and end on July 13th, 2019, unless we complete final compliance sooner.
Would Phillips 66 be economically harmed if the variance in this matter was not granted?
If the variance were denied, we would experience a significant economic loss.
And please provide details for the members of the hearing board.
Sure. So if the variance were denied and the Coke Barn could not be repaired, then we would not be able to produce and store Coke in compliance with district rules. The coker is a critical operating unit for the Carson plant. When it operates, the coker produces Coke, which must be stored in the barn prior to shipment and sales. If the Coke Barn is down or not available, then the coker cannot operate because there would be no place to store or ship the Coke in compliance with district rules. Over time, the loss of the barn may result in the shutdown, ultimately, of the Carson and Williamson plants.
If the repair work was never performed and the Coke Barn eventually failed, would Phillips be out of compliance?
Yes, if the Coke Barn failed, then we would be immediately out of compliance with the Rule 158. There would be a pile of Coke without a complete enclosure. Also, the coker must be shut down to stop movement of Coke into or out of the barn.
Has Phillips 66 prepared an estimate of economic harm?
Yes, if a buyer For coker feed was found on short notice, the remainder of the units at the refinery would be operated at a financial loss in excess of $1 million per day. If no buyer were found, then the entire facility, which is both the Carson and Wilmington plants, will be shut down indefinitely at a financial loss in excess of $2 million per day.
Potentially, could a shutdown of the Carson plant have any impact on regional fuel supplies?
Yes, the Carson plant shutdown would have a temporary impact on local fuel supplies. As I previously testified, a loss in fuel production at the Carson plant would impact regional petroleum product supplies and prices as well.
Would these losses result in the practical closing of a lawful business without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants, in your opinion, Mr. Zerga?
Yes.
In your opinion, would the granting of the short variances matter benefit the environment?
Yes, the granting of the variance would result in no net excess PM emissions.
And it would have also avoid the potential for flaring and all the other terrible
Correct.
things, right?
Right.
Would the granting of this variance create a nuisance condition?
No.
I have no more questions for this witness.
Ms. Sue, questions for Mr. Zerga?
Mr. Zerga, I would like you to turn your attention to Exhibit 9, paragraph 10, condition number 10.
Okay.
Can you describe how the petitioner is able to provide the district with the actual number of sulfur truck trips?
Right, so every sulfur truck is weighed coming in and going out, and there's a weight ticket created, and I believe there's also a bill of lading created, and so we have those records of shipment, so we'll be able to provide those to you with the count of those trucks.
And as for the estimated vehicle round trips to the Coke barn, how is that proposed to be provided?
So we've discussed with you counting the number of trucks that actually come in through the gate and are badged into the gate. And so there's electronic record created of the truck entering and then exiting. And so we'll count those up for you as well.
And those will be the number used to estimate the round trips?
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Zerga, I had one question and then a few questions on the variance conditions. The first question, I think I know the answer. I just want to make clear for the record. So there is no other storage possible at the site for Coke?
That's correct.
Okay, so this is the Coke barn is it?
Coke barn is it.
Okay. Turning now to Exhibit 9, the revised proposed conditions. My first question is on number 3, and it's just a wording question. It states that petitioner will maintain the surface area of components being replaced to not exceed 2%. Is that the same, components being replaced to any surface area open to the air?
Correct, that's the opening.
Okay, so you understand that to be the same?
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Oh, okay, I wanted to understand what condition number 4 means, separate and apart from the other conditions that are proposed. So it reads, petitioner shall use best efforts to ensure that no visible emission shall be observed during the repair period. Is there anything other than what is in the variance conditions that would be best efforts as well? I just want to understand what that means.
So this condition kind of relates to condition 7 in a way with the water spray. So we've talked about actually wetting the area underneath there, as well as the 12% moisture content of the Coke that would be underneath there, which is condition, I think, 2. So those are, so granted, it's a little bit redundant because the best efforts are also described in the other conditions, but we wanted to make sure we had something that was kind of an overarching condition for you.
I don't object to it, but I wanted to understand if there was anything additional, but Mr. Norton.
If I might, this is a product of some negotiation with the district. If you'll notice, it's quite true. I think that where the rubber hits the road is in paragraphs 5 and 6 of the proposed short variance conditions. These are add-ons by the district. Number 4, we don't expect really any visible emissions during the variance period, but we don't want to get a notice of violation if there's a strange puff that came out for some reason. So this is basically to make it not an absolute no visible emissions, realizing that conditions 4 and 5 and 6 really have the meat of it.
Shouldn't there be instead and is there, I'm sorry, because now I'm not remembering everything else that's in here, but is there a requirement of how often visible emissions need to be, you need to have someone checking for visible emissions?
And this is the quandary, because since we don't expect visible emissions, we're not very excited about having a certified eye on site for the entire period, just to confirm that there really are none. So the way we have it structured is, if you look at paragraph number 5, if opacity is observed, if we actually do see any visible emissions, then we would actually bring in a certified eye to read. And at least that was what the intent of it was. It's really trying to balancing the interest between having a certified eye and really not expecting visible emissions.
Okay, because as you explain, condition number 4, I do object a little bit more to having a condition that is supposed to be in there to ensure as much compliance as possible, giving sort of wiggle room. I mean, it's either you need the variance or you don't. And so, well, we can come back to that, but using best efforts, I'm not sure it has any teeth whatsoever, and whether it should even be in there.
We certainly could remove it and rely on paragraphs 5 and 6. That's really the evolution of our discussions with the agency.
Okay, well, and I can come back in closing and see what the position is of the district, and of course on discussions with board members. Okay, so and I also wanted to understand, because I had the same question Mr. Balagopalan had earlier with regard to any air pollution control equipment that might be there, because condition 7 refers to any water spray system or air pollution control equipment associated with the structure. The testimony was that there is none. Is that correct, in terms of air pollution control equipment?
Correct. There's no specific air pollution control equipment other than the barn is supposed to be enclosed, right? So that's why the water spray is there.
So does that need to be in there? It just seems
We can
it's
remove
referring
it.
to something that doesn't exist.
We should strike that
We should
language.
strike it out.
Okay. And maybe I missed this, but I want to understand you went over the routes that the pavement wetting would take, and in condition number 8, it's spelled out how many times per day and how many hours apart. How different is that from what is already being done at the site for these routes?
So those routes are not being wetted at all right
I know,
now.
okay.
Right.
Thank you, unless you had anything to add to that, but they're not being wet, and they will be wet in accordance with condition number 8.
Correct.
Okay. And the last sentence of that, please see petitioner's exhibit X should be 8?
Correct.
Okay. Well, those are my questions. Ms. Byrd has a question.
So the numbers that you have, the $1 million and the $2 million, if business is not in operation, or if the Coke barn is not available, are based on prior times that it wasn't available, or?
Mike?
Can I have a moment with my witness?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes, so it's actually based on some current experience at the Carson plant. Yeah.
When the
$1 million.
Coke barn was not available?
Right, and the coker was down.
Okay,
In
and
association with
you said when the Coker was down?
Right, so.
Okay.
And we have someone here that can give you more detail if you need it, but.
Well, I'm just trying to find out where some of the information came from, that's all. And so I don't know if you would know if the Coke barn if you have knowledge of when it may not have been available and how that was handled then in the past. And if it's just I'm not trying to ask you a complicated question, I'm just trying to, on the record, have some. When the Coke barn was not available for whatever reason, what happened?
And again, you're specifying if the Coke barn was not available.
Right.
Correct.
Right, so there are times when there's, let's say that one of the conveyor belts breaks, right, and we can't get into the coke barn with coke. They have to slow down the coker and fix the belt very fast or to get it to operating so that we can cut back into the barn without having to shut down the coker. So the coker and the coke barn in a way are tied together. Right, so there hasn't really been a time recently where the coke barn itself has been out of service for an extended time. The time when we were, as we talked about, when we attempted the early repair in April under the K-10 exemption, the coker was down at that time and we weren't moving coke into the barn. That's why we were able to meet that condition in K-10.
And if the coke barn has not been available that you know of, how long was it not available?
We're talking about the coke barn.
Well, so the barn itself, I think the last time that we weren't using the barn was during the 2016 turnaround.
The turnaround?
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't remember any time other than during the turnaround that it was not available?
Not recently, no.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Palagopoulos.
Yes, sorry, I gotta look up the name again. Scott Berger. Zerga, sorry. You're not asking relief from 1150 D1 for the visible emission standard, because I see the standard is more stringent than condition number 6 in the rule. It's 10% opacity or 1/2 Ringelmann.
Let me pull that out of here. Let's get that to refer to it ourselves. No, we're asking, I mean, again, we're not expecting the emissions at all, right? So, I mean, I don't know.
We're not asking for relief from D1. We think we can comply with it.
But, okay,
We do understand there's a condition that says if we exceed Ringelmann's, but we just
but that's
can't
a
do-
higher Ringelmann number, though, 20, when you have to notify the district. So should it be 10?
Should it be 10% is what you're asking?
I'm wondering why the district wanted 20, maybe we'll find, or when they need to be notified. But that will be, if you're more than 10%, you're essentially a violation of the rule there.
One moment, please.
We're off the record for a moment.
Can we change that to 10%?
We're back on the record.
Thank you. After consultation with the agency and with Phillips 66, we could change condition number 6 in the proposed short variance condition to read if opacity exceeds 10% Ringelmann's for greater than 3 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Zerga, who is a certified visible emission evaluator at your facility? Is that you, or is it somebody else who's certified?
No, we don't have any on staff. We would have to hire a contractor to do that. We have several contractors available to do that if needed.
So you have to call them to come in, but then the puff is gone and there's really nothing to, there's a lag. I mean, if you don't have anybody on site, is there somebody who can do a method, is it method 21, just looking at it, even if it's not certified VE? Because if you don't have anybody on site, when do you anticipate that individual coming to the site and looking at the reading, and will there be any visible emission during that time?
Right, so, obviously, the people will be working on the job will be the ones to see any potential puff, and that would initiate the call in condition 6 and the having someone come out in condition 5, right? So, to the district. So, as to the method 22 evaluator, I think we consulted with the district on that, and I think we landed on condition 5 instead.
So how long would it take somebody to come to the site when you contact them, and if they're available?
It depends
they
where
on-
they're at. If they're say they're at an office in Carson, they could get there, pretty quickly, 15, 20 minutes, whatever. Drive time, they gotta get in, gotta get set up, right? They gotta, of course, they got to get in the right position. I'm not certified in Method 9, so I don't know all the details of it, but I know you have to be in the right position with the sun and all that. So, you know, our concern on condition 5 is that, say these are typically the ones that we contract with are source test contractors that maybe have jobs at other sites or at the Wilmington plant, whatever. So if they got a call, hey, you need to come down, they would have to stop what they're doing, secure the job they were on currently, and then travel to Phillips, and then hopefully traffic is good, and then come on in, and, you know, so that's why we were a little concerned about the hours. So that's why we proposed a 2-hour window, so that we wouldn't be exposed to violating that condition 5 just from having traffic tie up somewhere.
And I think we heard testimony that this may be a puff that may occur, but it's not a continuous violation of the opacity.
Our first place we came from is we tried this for 14 days already, and we didn't have any visible emissions. So I think we've shown we can do this without any visible emissions. So you got to allow for crazy contingencies, and that's what these conditions are in here to address.
Now, there's an alternate test method that doesn't require you to be certified, where an individual, you know, going through the method that the AQMD is listed on their website, can do the observation. Are you?
Correct, I'm aware of that. That's method 22,
Right.
if I'm not mistaken. But again, in our discussions with the district, they were wanting us to do what's in condition 5, which is the method 9 VE certified person.
Okay, maybe we'll ask the district why they prefer that versus method 22. Mr. Zerga, are you familiar with the excess emission calculation that was done by the consultant environmental audit? Or,
Yeah,
okay. And you've reviewed their emission calculation,
correct.
and you're in agreement with how they estimated those emissions? And I'm not talking about the revised from the paved roads emission, but just from the storage piles and the
Right, I'm familiar with it, yeah, and,
So I had a few questions regarding that, so are you the right person to ask on that?
yep,
Okay.
sure.
So I'll go back to, I think it's, the assumption, is the enclosure control efficiency. What's the assumption, what's the control efficiency of the enclosure of the barn or the storage?
So you're on page,
Page, I guess, I'm sorry, let me go to Exhibit 3 and page,
May I make a recommendation?
yes,
Rather than use the version that's in the petition.
Oh, okay.
I would go with the Exhibit 7.
7,
Just
okay.
because the page numbers might be a little bit different.
Okay, I didn't mark those, but yeah, give me a minute, then I'll.
It's
correct it.
essentially, the numbers are all the same. It was just a correction of some of the references.
Okay, so I think it's Exhibit 3 then still?
I would call it Exhibit 7.
Oh, 7, sorry, Exhibit 7, there's no page number, that's why I'm having.
Is it, the version you're looking at, is it dated May 15th, 2019?
Okay, so it'll be, just looking at, let me take that page, 6. Actually, page 2 of 10. Do you see that?
yeah, I have it.
And right at the very end, where it says partially controlled emissions,
Right,
right? So enclosure control efficiency is given 95% based on 1158, correct?
right. We, environmental audit looked, I think the references are provided in here. They went back to the staff reports for Liberal 1158, and that's where they got the 95% overall control efficiency for having a barn in the first place.
Right.
And then the enclosure capture efficiency of 98%, that assumes the 2% opening that we've asked for, so you don't have 2%, so you have 98% left of the enclosure, and that's what that was based on.
So it's a reduction from the, when I saw the word capture, and when you mentioned there's no control equipment, normally it sort of implies that it's been captured to a control equipment, but there's not.
Right,
You're reducing further by 2% the overall control efficiency of the.
You got it, that's right, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so just a terminology
Right.
issue, okay. And then, and I think we'll go back to the paved emission because that overrides any minor correction or calculation here because it's more than the emissions from the operation of the material handling in the barn. But I do actually, let me go to page, I'm just trying to understand it, and
Sure.
let me see if I got the right. This should be 2.5. Go to page 7 of 10. Oh, sorry, not that, sorry, page 8. Okay, and I see in, sorry, step 3, that appropriately higher wind velocity was taken, should be based on the met data, 17 miles per hour. Is that the same, because further, maybe it didn't get, it got changed, because I saw later it was shown as 16.8, and then in step 6, it was showing for 15 miles per hour. Is that a separate calculation for 15 miles per hour, or is that, instead of 17, it's now gone to 15?
I see what you're saying, where you went for the step 3, the tabulated, I should say, first of all, that the 0.44 PM10, right? So we consider all PM5 to be, PM10 is inclusive of PM2.5.
Right.
So she calculated this separately for you, but I see what you're saying, where you jump from 17 miles an hour of the wind speed. I think in 3, she just reviewed it. We already had something higher than that, so she didn't adjust for it. The 15 miles an hour that you have down here is less, so there should be less emissions coming off, right?
Right. In the scheme of things, it's not going to, make much of a difference. When I was reviewing it, I was just wondering where that 15 came from. And there was also a 16.8, but I'm assuming that rounded up to 17. Is that how the 17 miles per hour came? Because in step 4, it refers to subscript 10, 16.8 miles per hour. So I'm assuming the 17 was a roundup from that. So, yeah, okay.
Reasonable.
Coming back to your calculation on exhibit number 8 on the paved roads,
Right.
the paved roads are for the coke loading are, the requirement to pave the roads is in 1158, right? For a certain stretch from the storage bin to,
That's right, but that's not these roads. So the road that you're talking about with the coke loading, if you look back at the picture, starts at the south side of you can see the barn on the far right of the picture,
right,
right? And so the road that loads out is coming from the last little, it looks like a squiggly line, but that's where the hopper is on the east side of the barn. And they drive essentially due north along the fence line, it's canted off to the right a little bit, and they drive out in their own separate entrance on Sepulveda Boulevard.
Oh, so this proposed route is not the one they
No,
actually use, so this is additional areas that you're wedding.
Right, so the load-out road for the trucks, the rule requires us to do street sweeping every 100
Right.
trucks and several other things, so that's a different road. than
That's
the
a
ones
different
that-
road, okay, so, okay, all right, I thought it was the same road, but you're now wetting it because the rule doesn't require it to be wetted, that's not the case?
We're wetting it because we're wetting it to do extra.
To do extra to mitigate the emissions from those.
Yeah, if it was required under the rule, we wouldn't be able to take credit for
Right.
this mitigation.
Since the district has reviewed this calculation, so the changes were made to this mitigation calculation based on district input?
Correct.
What were the specific changes that the district required?
The district asked me to look at the silt loading number, which is in that grayed out box. Those are the input variables, and they asked where I got that from and asked me, I think I worked with Connie on that, Connie E over there, on that to look at the silt loading. So I went to the low range of the value. I had an average before, which was higher. so that actually reduced my, my wetted a little bit.
So, oh, yeah, so I noticed you reduced it from
Correct.
250, something, 285 to 76. That was done based on
Yeah,
district's review.
that's right. That was most of the review. I mean, cleaned up a couple typos, but
Right.
changed the wetted time a little bit to be 4 hours instead of 3. It's because the truck drives 3 times and it's wet a little bit more than an hour, so that's why I have 4 hours. And 4 over 24 is the P over N.
Now, the silt loading is also used elsewhere in the calculation, in the storage area. So do you,
This
so
is the silt loading from, that I got from AP 42.
AP40, I know there is a range.
There's a range, right,
Yeah.
and so the bottom of that range is 76.
76, so
That's what I
you
put in there.
Okay.
Right, it's, same with the other numbers are the average vehicle weight, that's the bottom one, the K is the bottom one.
Okay.
So that gives you the least amount of.
Okay, no, yeah.
over there.
If
So that was conservative.
okay,
Rather than using an average, I just used.
oh,
the
I
range.
see, okay, so, yeah, okay, you used a more conservative because there is a exponent there. Okay,
Correct.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Zerga? Senator?
Exhibit 8, you put that together?
Yes, I did.
You did, all right. It's PM 10 mitigation calculation.
Right.
What about the table 13.2.1-1? Is that a table or is it a diagram?
So, there's a table in the AP 42 section, right, that gives you the, those numbers, so it's like it has a table of values in it. It's in EPA's,
In Exhibit 3, 13.2.1-1 is a diagram. And then those little discussion at the top, you call that a table, I guess.
okay.
Same thing as in Exhibit.
Yeah, so there's a, I mean, that EPA, that thing is kind of long, there's a diagram in there, there's some other stuff, but this particular value is a table that I got out of it.
I don't see the table.
I'll find it for you here. This is in 13.2. She dug that up in here. Table. So the table with the silt loading on it, 13.2.1-3 is on
That's 3.
page, it's kind of towards the back here,
That's not the one you
this one here.
listed here.
Yeah,
That's not the one you listed in Exhibit 8. In your diagram, you have 13.2.1-1. The reference.
so the K, right, so there's a couple of tables. So the table 3 basically is the one with the silt loading values. And then table 2 is something else, and then, because you didn't have table 1 in here. So in part 1,
Description 1, 2,
the K,
1 through 9 on this diagram. It's kind of blurred. Will you walk me through that, please?
there's this table 1 here.
Could I ask that you look at what's been marked as Exhibit number 7, which is just it's a better copy? It might have taken
Oh,
care
I looked at 7, they're still blurred.
same blurred?
Same way, I looked at both of them.
Okay,
You can look at it, and you see it's blurred also.
okay.
So you're talking about this, the figure 13.2.11? What you're talking about?
211-1, yeah.
Is the one with the cars and the trucks on it?
Tell me what, I can't see some of this. It's pavement, wear, and what is that all?
It says, deposition and removal process? Oh, I see what you're saying. Like you said, pavement wear and
blurred.
decomposition.
Just tell me, what's the next one? Wear and decomposition.
Vehicle-related deposition.
Decomposition,
Yeah, that's decomposition.
at what rate does it decompose? You gotta be a rate, you have to work with numbers.
So, I mean, so what you're trying to do is to start with that, on the next, I think it's the next page, that predictive emission factor equation. You're trying to get to big E, And that's equation 1 there, and that's the one with the exponents, and then you start working down to get the size range, particle size multiplier K, and that's where I picked the PM10 of 0.0022, which is in the table there. And so I don't know if the drawing, I mean, that's obviously not my document, right? That's EPA's document, but I think they're just trying to give you a picture of all the things that are happening there.
All these items, 1 through 9, contributes to increase in PM, but you're doing something to correct it, to mitigate it. Is that not correct?
So we're wetting the road to mitigate the PM, right? So that, by doing
Oh,
that,
what-
Yeah, I believe this is EPA's just background information to support their calculation methodology.
Please,
When we apply it to the roads is how we get to exhibit number 8. And
Mr. Scott, is that your name, sir?
Zerga.
Zerka, you did the Exhibit 8.
I did.
At least you can explain it to me then.
Right, so, and so the equation, that's equation, which has the,
can I have just a
equation-
moment with my witness? Just a second.
just a second.
Yes.
Okay, so the whole point of this calculation is to say what is it starts with the silt loading, and you're trying to say what is the time that it's wetted and the time that it's dry, and the difference between the two gives you the reduction in the PM that comes off it. And so that's, all these different numbers come from AP 42, and through this, as you can see, it's a fairly complicated equation, right, that gives you the time that it's, the pounds per mile that it's wet and the pounds per mile that it's dry, and you
You
just need to know
show
the
that,
total
you
miles.
show here the numbers 1 through 9. You also show indicating that transportation is moving 1 through 9. Could you just tell me what you're doing here? What those numbers correlate to?
1 through 9, that's the, okay. So there's, okay. So the silt, I mean, there's really not a lot on here, right, that pertains to it, because obviously we don't have ice control, which is number 9, right, in the south coast here, right? So this is the silt loading is probably vehicle-related deposition or dust fall, and not litter, of course. And then you have of course, this is really relating to what's on the road itself. And then that's pretty much it. It's on there.
What's number
really.
7?
Number 7 is spills. I mean, so we shouldn't have any of that, so.
Which indicate that it does.
I think they're just trying to give you a flavor of what could be on the road that you're trying to control here, right? They did, anyway.
Is the particular portion of that exhibit that the senator is pointing to, is that instrumental to understanding excess emissions in this case, or is that just part of an overall procedure for calculating excess emissions?
That's just part of the overall procedure of how you calculate it, what's
Okay, so it's
involved in
not
it.
specific to this excess emissions calculation per se?
The drawing's not, no.
So Exhibit 8 is not specific.
Oh, the
Please
drawing,
calculate.
It includes more information in Exhibit 8 than is, or 7? You're talking about 7.
7, right, 7 has,
8,
You were just referring to Exhibit 7.
but it's Exhibit 8.
I know, but before that, you have open.
I know, but the book, this diagram is included in Exhibit 7 and Exhibit 3.
Right. So Exhibit 3 and Exhibit 7 have significantly more information than is necessary for the ultimate calculation of excess emissions in this.
that's correct. We wanted to give you all the background information on that. That's correct.
But you talk about vehicle trips, I mean, it's just inconclusive in terms of you not able to explain it.
Let's go back to the excess, just so we're clear, excess emissions in this case is different from mitigation, is that correct? They're coming from different sources. Excess emissions is from the opening in
Emissions are
the
from
barn.
opening, correct.
Okay.
right.
And the mitigation in Exhibit 8 is coming from the cleaning of the roads. Is that correct?
You got it. Yeah.
So they're different.
They're trying to reduce PM to show that the maximum PM is within range. And that's the attempt of this mitigation program. They give you numbers about what they're doing there as they mitigate to reduce the production of PM10.
Yep.
Okay, now let me ask you a question, another question. You work the roads down every 3 hours, maybe, huh?
Well, we're committing to 3 times a day,
3 times a day? Okay, 3 times a day.
right?
They say at least 3 times a day.
Correct.
You ever do it more than 3 times a day?
We thought 3 times a day was reasonable, given that then that mitigation offsets the emissions.
There you go back to mitigation. Okay, I understand. Now, if you're doing it more than 3 times a day, what caused you to do that, if at all?
If we were to do it more than 3 times a day?
What situations occurs where you are required to wet it down more than 3 times a day? Or if at all?
No,
Was the testimony that these roads are not required to be wet down at all?
correct. These roads are never wetted.
But the argument they're using is that they wet the roads in order to reduce the PM level.
That's
Use
correct,
that- use
because
that-
you're,
And they use that as a contributing factor to show why they should reduce it by a certain amount. That's what it says.
The roads are normally dry
All right,
all the
sir.
time.
That's what read it.
Yes, I think what I remember the testimony in its basic terms is, for exhibit number 8, he did a calculation using EPA 42 factors of how much dust would be generated from a dry road, and then he calculated how much dust would be generated from a wet road, subtracted the two, and came up with a reduction.
Right.
And then that's pretty much what we did.
but that's,
And that's what you use in an argument.
Yeah, and what we're saying is, these are roads that are not wetted usually, they're not required to be wetted. And if we wet them, we can actually achieve some PM10 reductions, not much. It's a pound a day. It's, it's nothing to put into the newspaper. But in this case, it more than offsets the half a pound a day that we would get from the opening in the coke barn.
If it's so frivolous in terms of the approach you're taking, why the weight of the vehicle contribute to it? You define the weight of the vehicle trips, and so on, as determining factors reduced to PM.
And and fortunately, EPA does that for us with their AP 42 factors. They incorporate all that.
Okay, are there any other variables that you might know, you can think of?
No, I think that's really the basic. That's it.
So the idea is to have the roads wet,
Roads that don't normally need to be wet, we wet them down and reduce the dust from the
reduce the
refinery.
dust.
Correct.
Okay. Does the temperature or the wind have a factor?
Not in this, no.
So if you get a little warm, it dries up real fast, doesn't matter.
We're gonna come back and water it in a few hours anyway. The dust doesn't really have much of a chance to build up.
So there are times you do it more than 3 times a day then,
Well, I think
possibly.
we're probably not gonna do it more than 3 times a day. 3 times a day is probably what it is. But this is a condition that the board will impose upon us. So we're gonna do it as many times as you tell us. But-
Absolutely.
But we think 3 times a day is reasonable.
Mr. Palagopoulos.
Just sort of following up on the senators, on the variable on the truck weight. In this revised calculation, you're showing 2 tons.
Right.
In page 7 of 10, it was 20 tons. Pickup truck is what, half a ton? So would this be a heavier? In page 7 of 10,
So those are, so the
It's a
in
diff-
7 of 10, those are from the barn itself, and due to the activities at the barn, this is
just
this is just driving back and forth. There's
the
two
truck that
different-
is
they're two different
wetting
things.
okay, so it's not from the,
No,
but the uncontrolled emissions is from the heavy-duty, what trucks go on that paved road when it's not controlled? What's the weight of the truck? I
I don't
mean,
understand your question. So the part in the calculations in the front there, in 7 of 10, that refers to the coke trucks themselves driving back and forth.
right,
And this, in the mitigation emissions, those are from standard duty trucks driving back and forth on a road that's going to be wet, it was normally dry.
and what are they carrying? This is just the water truck you're talking about here, or
This is just regular traffic trucks. Like,
traffic truck?
Like like a F-150.
They don't load any, I mean, it's not a,
They might have some tools in them. There's
Oh, okay, so
various
it's not-
sizes of, you could think of a pickup truck with tools in it sometimes or whatever.
These are the worker trips.
Worker trips.
what about in the sulfur area?
So those sulfur area, those trucks are heavier because they're driving down empty, and I don't know what the tear weight is, and they're picking up sulfur and loading up with the full load of sulfur driving back out.
So would this be representative of that? It wouldn't
And
be, right?
anything that understates it, because we're using the 2 tons there. I'm sure 20 tons may be a better number there, but it's a more weight, so this is a more conservative number,
Since it's, okay.
since it's less weight, right?
Right. Okay, no, I think that's, I don't know, that's, I see the discrepancy, so that's, not maybe discrepancy, I see the difference between the two. So that's what, okay, thank you.
Senator?
Oh, I think he just testified that you didn't have to wet the roads, not at all. You're just doing that.
Normally, the roads that we're mitigating are not wetted at all, that's right.
Well, what roads are we talking about then? When you mitigate, which roads are you mitigating and for what purpose?
So the roads we're mitigating are shown on the drawing, that's in Exhibit 8, in the red lines.
I know I talked about Exhibit 8. I'm looking at the,
And
Yeah,
Senator,
but I'm
Senator
looking
Holden, I don't know if this will help or not, but of course, we would only be wetting these additional roads during the variance period as mitigation to offset the small emissions that we would get out of the coke barn. As soon as we stop our work at the coke barn, we would stop wetting those roads because it's not required. That's another reason it's mitigation.
that's right, that's item number 14. Ends up on page 5 of the petition, at the very top. It talks about wetting of the roads. And when you do that, you can save a pound, 0.09 pounds per day.
Yes.
Yep.
So wetting is essential, apparently.
It certainly is essential to achieve the reductions that the board wants during the variance period.
That's the board, that's required.
Will require. Yes, if we grant the variance.
All right, that's all described there, just what reductions are based on what you do.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Zerga? Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Norton, did you have any other witnesses?
No other witnesses, unless the hearing board would like to hear additional testimony. I think we're done on our side.
I don't see that we are requiring any. Thank you. Ms. Sue, you had said that you did not intend to call any witnesses. Is that still true?
Yes, that's correct.
Was there a question that you had, Mr. Balagopalan, that you wanted to have answered?
Why the district did not choose method 22 and instead having somebody else come in from, the timing is the issue of.
Actually, considering what you said, we would be amenable to adding method 22 as a condition. In addition to until the certified evaluator is able to come on site.
Okay, thank you.
Is that, Mr. Norton?
I think, could you flesh out a little bit more for me so I don't assume and start writing a new condition?
To have someone conduct a method 22 evaluation until the certified evaluator can come on site.
Okay, let me just talk with my folks.
And that would come on condition number 5 before the visible emission valuation by the certified evaluator? Okay. Mr. Norton?
Thank you. After consultation with Phillips 66, we can agree to having somebody do a predetermination using method 22 in advance of the certified eye coming onto the site. So it might read, if opacity is observed, petitioner shall conduct a method 21 analysis, method 22 analysis. And I would say, in addition, petitioner shall conduct visible emissions. Then I would just end it, period, and put.
Period, and then in addition.
I think that would work.
Okay, and then we can reread that, whoever makes a motion, should we get to that point, into the record. Thank you. Yes.
I did have a question, if I can ask the district engineer.
Can you
Just one quick
let
question.
Ms. Hu know what question you would want to ask?
Sure,
and
I
then-
just wanted to find out, since I see she has the scientific calculator, whether the weight of the truck actually with the exponent is, what difference it makes of the 2 versus 20.
Ms. Sue, if you could introduce the witness when she's ready.
I have here Ms. Yi. Ms. Yi, could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Oh, okay, yes, I had asked if anybody had any questions,
Oh, I
Mr.
didn't hear, I'm
Zerga.
sorry.
Okay, sorry, before, maybe she can do that calculation while we go back to Mr. Zerga. The senator has a
In the
question.
revised condition, number 8, it's clear, it's not may or may not wet the roads, it said you shall,
Right,
okay?
yes.
Tell you how you do it too, that's all.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Zerga before we go back to Ms. Sue, who's going to introduce one more witness? Okay,
If we could take maybe 5 minutes to let her do a calculation before responding to any questions?
okay.
Would you like to look at other revised proposed short variance conditions in the interim, or?
Oh, did you have additional revisions?
No.
Oh, you're asking the board whether, in my estimation, I think we still need to consider whether condition 4 would remain. We would be changing number 6 to, we would be changing number 5, as was just read out, with regard to adding method of 22. Number 6 would be changed from 20% to 10%. Number 7 would be to remove air pollution control equipment. And number 8 would be to add Exhibit 8. I don't think anyone else has had any other.
No, I guess we'll add the duration when the variance starts and ends.
Yeah, no. We're just working on if we wanted to make proposed
Right.
changes. We haven't even just gone into deliberation or made a motion. Okay, so let's go off the record for a few minutes longer.
Please.
Okay, we're off the record.
What they used, 2 to that 1.02
I think we're still.
I think I'm
Well,
done.
we have some other business, perhaps.
We're back on the record. Mr. Norton, you had something you wanted to?
Thank you. Yeah, after consultation with the district, they would like some additional changes to the revised proposed short variance conditions, just assuming that we get there.
This would be a good time while the calculation is completing.
Okay. So for condition number 4, the district is willing to delete that. On number 5, the change the district would like is to change the 2 hours to 1.5 hours. So I believe it would read in our modified form, if opacity is observed, petitioner shall perform a method 22 analysis. In addition, petitioner shall conduct visible emissions VE evaluation, et cetera. No change there, and then the 2 hours would be changed to 1.5. In number 6, we have the 20% change to 10%. And in number 7, the district would like to make this simply, petitioner shall use a water spray system, so delete the ensure that any, and then delete the or air pollution control equipment. So, and then delete will be in use as needed. So it would read, petitioner shall use a water spray system associated with the structure to prevent visible emissions during the repair period. That seems acceptable.
Yeah.
In paragraph number 8, we're of course changing Exhibit X, which was a placeholder, to Exhibit number 8. The X, Exhibit X, it should be 8, the number 8, because that's what that exhibit was marked. In number 10, the district would like to add a sentence. After the first sentence, it would read, petitioner shall use the gate log to calculate the worker trips. That's petitioner shall use the gate log to calculate the worker trips. That would be a sentence after the first sentence.
Meaning in the fourth line?
Yes. In between the period, where it says period and the period, and where it says petitioner. And I believe those are the only changes requested by the district.
And how much more time do we need?
Just give me one more minute.
Okay.
I just want to make sure this is correct. Okay.
Did you want to see the calculations first? You're okay.
We trust you. On the record.
We are still on the record, that is true. Okay, Ms. Sue, please.
Right, here I have Ms. Yi. Ms. Yi, can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Absolutely. My name is Connie Yi. First name is spelled C-O-N-N-I-E. Last name is spelled Y-E-E.
And what is your role here at the South Coast AQMD?
I am air quality engineer. I do permitting for the Phillips 66 refinery.
And how long have you been in this role?
For this particular refinery,
Or as a role as a permitting engineer?
31 years.
Okay, and did you review Phillips 66 calculations in Exhibit 8?
I did, yes.
Great, and I think Mr. Balakopoulon had a question for Ms. Yi.
Yeah, just, what's the difference if you use the 2 tons versus the 20 tons as far as the emissions and the reductions?
As using the 20 tons for the sulfur and the 2 tons for the
For
vehicle trucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you able to break out the two?
I did a quick and dirty
that's fine, yeah,
estimation, and I got the total reduction using the 20 tons for the sulfur and 2 tons for the vehicle trucks. It's about 0.52.
Uncontrolled, after reduction?
That's just a reduction.
With the reduction,
Yes, yes,
0.52?
yes, yes.
Okay. Still more than what is estimated from the storage
That is correct.
facility? Okay, all right. Thank you. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but thank you.
I'm glad I brought this.
For the calculator, I saw that, so I knew you could do it.
Note for future hearings, don't put your calculator up where anyone can see it. Thank you, Ms. He, for making that calculation. Any other questions on that? Senator? I think there was a visible gasp
It doesn't seem
that you could
possible. She looks so
possibly be
young.
here for 31 years.
She looks so young. There's not, that's,
I owe it to my parents. Yes. That is correct.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, I'm going to ask if there's any member of the public who wishes to be heard in this matter. I see none. Mr. Norton, your closing, please.
thank you very much. I do think that sufficient evidence in testimony and exhibits and supporting reports has been provided that the hearing board can make the 6 findings required to issue a short variance in this matter. I won't go through the 6 findings. You do that so well. I'll simply say that the petroleum coke is a necessary and useful byproduct of the refining process. We've heard testimony that petitioner cannot operate the Carson plant as it's designed without the coke barn in service. It's the only place to put coke at the refinery. We think we heard testimony on that. Our issue here is that repairs were attempted on the coke barn, structural repairs, but they couldn't be completed within the 14 days allowed for under the exemption, 1158. But 1158 D2 requires the operator to maintain all coke piles and enclosed storage. So to go back into the barn, they have to open the panels, some panels, looks like it's less than 2% of the surface area, to complete their demolition work and to install 3 supporting I-beams in the structure. The issue is beyond Phillips's reasonable control. These are really old I-beams. They've been in place for 49 years, and in a particularly corrosive environment, you could see that the water was coming down in the drone video, and you also heard testimony that the coke is a little acidic. So that is a tough environment for steel to operate, and 49 years is a really good length of service for an I-beam in that type of a corrosive environment. But it has reached the end of its useful life. It needs to be replaced, and there's really no other way to do it other than to remove some of the panels on the coke barn, limited to 2% of the overall surface area. There should be no excess emissions in this matter with mitigation. The coke is moist and will be stored in the barn. There's a condition that we have to keep it at 12% moisture. The excess emissions of PM10 are estimated at only 0.44 pounds per day. We've had some calculations of the reduction. They varied between 1.06, 0.98, and 0.54 pounds per day, depending on the assumptions. I think all of those would provide sufficient offsets in this matter to allow for the hearing board to grant the variance. We also heard testimony that if the variance were denied, that Phillips 66 would experience a significant economic loss estimated of in excess of $1 million per day. If the coke barn failed unexpectedly, that would cause a bigger problem, because then Phillips 66 would be out of compliance entirely, because they would have a coke pile without an enclosure. It would also lead to the shutdown and restart of other refinery units. Repairing the coke barn at this time would eliminate the risk and seems the prudent thing to do. To achieve final compliance, Phillips is asking for 40 days, starting on June 3rd, 2019, and ending on July 13th, 2019, to complete the coke barn repairs. I think we've heard testimony that they need until June 3rd to be able to get the site ready, bring in the 5 cranes, et cetera. And the petitioner has worked very hard with the district on the revised proposed short variance conditions, which have been much more fleshed out and are much more enforceable. Testifying in support, we heard Scott Zerga and Khalid Ali. I thought they did an excellent job And I did think that the drone video was pretty cool. And thank you very much.
And on that note, Ms. Sue?
The district does not oppose the refinery's request for a short variance. The refinery presented evidence regarding the work needed to replace and repair the coke barn, to repair the coke barn and why it was necessary to do so now. Importantly, the conditions require mitigation measures to mitigate any excess emissions from the opening in the coke barn. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask if anyone wants to begin discussion. But before we do, I wanted to just, there have been a lot of very specific questions about the mitigation and the emissions that would be mitigated and the amount and offsetting. And all those are relevant. However, I wanted to point out in what is tab 3 of our binders, which is our excess emission guidance that we have adopted, that the 6 findings will be made based on the total amount of excess emissions without regard to any reductions due to mitigation. Where the mitigation comes in is with our 5th finding. And so we're more concerned in terms of calculation for purposes of our discussion on the calculation of the actual excess emissions, and mitigation is mitigation. So would anyone like to begin discussions on that? Mr. Balagopalan.
Well, I think the drone video was helpful in seeing the damage, and I must say it was a lot brighter than the Game of Thrones episode. So, so that's good. Yeah, I think they have. I think Phillips 66 has taken the right approach in addressing the issue. They have did the repair that they could within the 14 days and realized that there's more extensive damage and need additional time to do the repair. And it appears that the structural integrity of the barn it's really been compromised. So they will definitely need to shore up and remove the beams and do the work. And in that period, yes, there will be panels that has to be opened that cannot be avoided. And we heard testimony from Mr. Ali that they cannot essentially put a tarp over it, and that'll take a huge. I mean, it'll delay the period when they finally have to complete the job, and also putting plywood at the end of the shift, and then removing it and doing that. So it looks like they would, however, limit the openings to less than 2% of the total area, which is one of the requirements in the rule if they were doing the repair. So I think they are taking the right steps. I think they will. Also, they will be in violation when they do the additional repair to remove the beams, and it's beyond the reasonable control because it's something that has happened, and it's something they have to do it. So, and I think the practical closing and elimination of would be beyond the. I think it's beyond the reasonable control of the petitioner, and I think if the shutdown would be without a benefit in reducing air contamination, because it's not the turnaround time for them to do that. And then if they were to shut down and there's economic loss plus the startup and all, the operation will actually put in more emissions than necessary. And we've seen that they've looked at curtailing operation, but then I think they'll continue. They say they will wet the pile so that it'll reduce the dust emissions. So. And we also heard testimony that they will reduce excess emission to the maximum extent possible. We saw that they will be watering down the paved roads that they are not required to do currently, which will mitigate overall emissions from the facility, not from the source per se, but from the other areas of the plant. So the net impact, I'm not saying that it's going to be it's cleaner. I mean, it would be, the calculations show it'll be less than, the mitigations more than the actual emission, calculated emissions from the storage bin and silos. And so I think, and it appears, the conditions will require them to monitor and report any opacity exceedance to the district if it exceeds the 10%.
Ms. Bird, you had to add?
I just wanted to say I agree with the findings that Mr. Bagel, sorry, my tongue's not working today. Mr. Mohan has presented. as well as, I think one of the key factors for me is the failure of this unit versus the preventive steps to be taken right now are important, especially with the fact that the emissions are not going to be exceeding what would normally happen. They will mitigate what would naturally happen. And so for that reason, I think that's makes it a stronger case even than all the other findings.
And I also can make the findings. I think that with regard to beyond reasonable control, I think no matter what, this has to be repaired. And I think it makes a lot of sense that a variance will be required no matter what, because it's longer than the 14-day, and the 14-day was already taken. But if they wait too long, it could collapse. If they try and empty it out now, it could take 6 weeks, plus they'd have to stop putting coke into the barn, and probably take a lot longer than that, and causing a shutdown of the coker, which would then end up with flaring and possibly most likely more emissions on the startup of different units, including the coker unit. And we heard testimony that the only time that it is really emptied, this coker barn, is during a complete and total turnaround, which won't happen again until 2025. So I think it's clearly beyond reasonable control for all those reasons. And I don't think I have anything more to add. Senator, did you have anything you wanted to add?
They testified that they have a preventative maintenance program, but they didn't, unable to present the schedule when they make repairs prior to failure. Notwithstanding that, I guess you made a good faith effort, but I would like to have seen that schedule of repairs prior to failure, because you said you had it.
I think that the testimony was that the preventative maintenance is done once a month, and repairs are made as needed. So I think that that was the testimony, that they couldn't present an actual schedule because it's not always done per a schedule, but as needed.
That's not the purpose of preventative maintenance. You repair before failure is preventative maintenance.
Right, and sometimes it shows that it might fail. Okay, fine. Any other discussion? Mr. Balagopalan, would you like to make a motion? Sure, sure. We'll take a moment.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So in the matter of Phillips 66, case number 4900-106, I move that we grant a short variance commencing June 3rd to July 13th for 40 days. And from Rule 1158B2 and permit conditions that were listed. You want me to read the condition? Get the petition. Page 3 of the petition for the device ID D113, which is the storage of the coke in the coke barn device, and from various condition from 1158 D2 District Rule 203B to 2004 F1 and administrative conditions 13.1 and E136.1, and also specifically permit condition S 13.1, E136.1, and at Section A administrative condition number 2. So this equipment is located at 1520 East Sepulveda Boulevard in Carson. And see, the conditions of the variance has been set forth in exhibit number 9 with the following changes. the condition number 4 is removed. Condition number 5 has been modified to include method 22 analysis. Do you want me to read the revised language?
If you can, otherwise
Yeah,
I,
okay.
but I think it's helpful for the clerk of the board to have it all in one place.
1.5 hours,
What's that?
1.5.
Just if you can read the whole thing into the record.
Yeah, condition number 5, opacity is observed, petitioner shall perform a method 22 analysis, and in addition,
Petitioner shall.
petitioner shall conduct visible emission evaluation by a certified VE evaluate as soon as possible, but no later than 1.5 hours after opacity is first observed. The petitioner shall continue to make evaluation until visible emission cease. And then in condition number 6, we are changing the opacity from 20% to 10%. So it should read if opacity exceeds 10%, Ringelmann 1, and the rest stays the same. In condition number 7, should read now, petitioner shall use a water spray system associated with the structure to prevent visible emission during the repair period. So the reference to the air pollution control equipment and will use as needed is to be removed. Condition number 8, the last sentence, but please see petition exhibit 8 instead of X for refinery map highlighting the roads. And then on condition number 10, after the first sentence, petitioner shall use the gate log to calculate the worker trips, shall be added to condition number 10. And petition 11 shall pay all Apple fees if by July,
We should do it 15, generally 15
15
days.
days after that?
No, 15 days after today, so.
Oh, 15 days after, okay. So by 15 days after today's hearing date.
And if we have a date, we could add that in.
Madam Chair,
Does that, well, one moment, we're still in the motion. Does that complete your motion? Would you like to say excess
Just the-
emissions?
Oh, yeah, the excess emission, I'm sorry, that was calculated for PM10 emissions from the 3 operations, basically, the equipment traffic and storage area, erosion of pile surfaces, and loading of aggregate into storage piles. So the total for PM10 is 0.044 pounds per day, so it's less than a,
Is
I'm
that
sorry.
correct, or is it 0.44?
no, it's 0.44 pounds per day, not
0.44.
4 pounds per day. The petitioner is mitigating some of this emission elsewhere in the plan, and that would offset the increase from this bond. And so the calculation is still, even with the revised calculation of about 0.52 pounds per day, it's higher than what will be emitted from this
But the excess emissions are,
0.44
pounds
per day for PM10.
Thank you.
does that complete your motion?
Yeah, except, do we put the date when the
15 days?
June the 5th, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll be adding, is it your motion to add June 5th, June 5th into the blank on condition 11?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to second the motion, and Senator, I'll come to you in one moment for discussion. I'm going to second the motion, and I'm going to ask, number 1, I don't believe that in your recitation of the rules from which the variance will be granted, that you included 3002C1 with regard to the permit conditions. Do you accept including that as well?
Yes.
Okay. And then finally, do you accept the way that you have described the term of the variance? It would begin June 3rd and end July 13th, no matter what. Can we say ending July 13th or until final compliance, whichever occurs first?
Yeah, that's
That's
good.
acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay. Senator, you had something to,
stated my question.
oh, that was a question? Okay. Okay, so is there any other discussion on that motion? Okay, seeing none. Senator, how do you vote? Ms. Byrd, how do you vote?
Yes.
I vote yes, and Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 4-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for an excellent presentation, and good luck. Any other business, board members? Okay, seeing none, we are adjourned, and we will be back tomorrow. We're off the record. Excellent job, Mr.
Mr.